Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is story about what if Naruto doesn't trust Kakashi part 1. Before I start, please do support for more amazing content and comments for part 2. Do consider to subscribe my channel and share my video to your friends and check out the description as well. Let's start the video. Report. Sir. The ANBU with the crude markings of a bear stood at attention in front of his leader. All evacuated civilians have been moved to temporary locations. Tenzo is working overtime to provide shelters with the help of several proficient Doton wielders. ANBU Squad Beta and Delta are patrolling the borders in case opposing villages are trying to infiltrate during the confusion. We have also received word from Jiraiya-sama that said his ETA should be about a week. Nothing yet from Tsunade-sama. Thank you, Bear, you may return to your squad. Bear saluted once more before vanishing in a burst of speed. Turning his head to his window, Hiruzen Sarutobi cast weary eyes to his ruined village. More than 60% of Konoha had been turned to rubble during the mysterious attack of the nine-tailed fox. Peering down at the hospital chart, over 100 Jonin had perished, along with 243 Chunin and 436 Genin. He cringed when his eyes landed on the 4-digit number that displayed the civilian casualties. Truly, this was a disastrous day for Konoha. 2 days had passed, and the village was still in a state of chaos. He'd been doing his best to keep everything as quiet as possible to not alert the other villages of their vulnerable position, but news would eventually break out. Konoha will need to be on its feet by then. Sometimes it was hard to believe that there existed creatures powerful enough to reduce a strong and proud village to ashes. A high-pitched wail startled him out of his thoughts and drew his eyes to the chair in his office that now held a small cradle. Getting up from his seat and ignoring the creaking of his aged bones, the third Hokage hurried over to said cradle and carefully picked up the newborn from within. Hush now, Naruto, everything is all right. He gently rocked the blonde baby back and forth as he kept crying. What's the matter, are you hungry? Reaching into the cradle, he pulled out a baby bottle and began feeding Naruto, who was only too happy to drink from it. Hiruzen sadly watched the baby that looked so much like Minato. Kushina and Minato would have been the best parents for this baby, he was sure. They both looked absolutely giddy at the prospect of raising this child, so much so that they'd already started buying toys and clothes for him. But instead of being a day for celebration, it was now a day for grieving. You've been dealt a pretty bad hand, haven't you? Now finished with his meal, Naruto giggled softly before soon falling back asleep under Hiruzen's gentle rocking. God, he was bad at this. He never was any good at taking care of toddlers. His wife, Biwako, was the maternal one. Biwako, his heart clenched painfully as he closed his eyes at the thought of his now late wife. Her body had been found at the remote location that Kushina gave birth in with mysterious stab wounds. Truly a sad day for Konoha. A knock on the door brought him back to reality. Enter, he said softly, trying not to jostle the babe in his arms. The door opened and a familiar mop of lopsided gray hair walked in, with the face of a snarling dog that usually came with the hair. Ah, dog. Hiruzen gently set Naruto into his cradle and walked over to his desk, grunting softly as he sat back down. I've been expecting you. Dog's masked face seemed to linger on the cradle for a moment before he focused on his leader, saluting by force of habit. Hokage-sama. Please, Kakashi. Remove your mask. Kakashi reached up and unclipped his mask from his face, revealing the single bloodshot eye that wasn't covered by his village's headband. It seemed Hiruzen wasn't the only one to not have been getting any sleep. Kakashi once more looked back at the cradle. Reaching into his drawer, he searched around in it for a few seconds before taking out his pipe, filling it with tobacco as he let the young teen gather his thoughts. So this is Sensei's child, huh? He walked a bit closer to the cradle. He already looks so much like him. Indeed. All was silent save for the noise of tobacco being stuffed inside the wooden pipe. With a snap of his fingers, the pipe was lit and brought to the lips of the old Hokage. What will happen to him? The young prodigy asked without taking his eyes off the whiskered baby. Hiruzen inhaled deeply before blowing out a small cloud of smoke. He will be placed in the orphanage until he is of age to take care of himself. Kakashi finally tore his eyes away from Naruto. Hokage-sama, if I may. I know what you are about to ask, Kakashi, and the answer is no. He puffed once more on his pipe to settle his nerves and continued, ignoring the teen's irritated eye. You are much too young to be taking care of a child, and are not in the right state of mind. As you are now, you would not be fit to be taking care of a baby. Not only that, Konoha needs you now more than ever. You are the squad captain of ANBU's primary team. We need you to take missions to acquire funds that this village so desperately needs right now. Kakashi clenched his fists in frustration. Do you really believe that he will be well treated in an orphanage? You and I both know what he is, what he contains. You know how people will react once they learn of it as well. Kakashi wasn't wrong, Hiruzen knew that. Mere moments after his birth, little Naruto had the greatest burden placed upon him. The massive monstrosity that ravaged the village was now sealed away into the belly of the baby. It's true, he will most likely be mistreated. The life of a Jinchuriki is never an easy one, but he raised his voice slightly when he saw Kakashi about to interject. Rest assured that I will have my most trusted people taking care of him. Kakashi once more turned his gaze to the sleeping baby. He was only 14 years old himself. He knew better than anyone that he was no father material for a baby. But still, this did not feel right. And what of Jiraiya-sama? On his way, was the short reply. Though he will not be able to take care of Naruto either, Kakashi. Much like you, Jiraiya has his spy network to take care of. Please trust me when I tell you that Naruto will remain safe. I will make sure of it. The young teen stood unmoving for a few moments before slowly reaching into his ANBU pants pocket and pulling out a small object. Leaning down, he placed the object in the cradle next to the sleeping baby and stood back up, turning back around to face his leader who was now looking at him questioningly. It's a toy that Sensei bought for Naruto a few weeks ago. The Hokage's eyes turned sad as he was reminded of Minato's eagerness to be a father. I see. Kakashi observed the old Sarutobi. Shoulders tense, posture stiff, vacant eyes, index finger repeatedly tapping on his desk. The trail of smoke coming from his pipe was being gently guided out to the open window, most likely from a small futon manipulation so as not to disturb the sleeping baby. Reaching down to his belt, he took his mask and clipped it back onto his face. At your command, Hokage-sama? The aged Hokage stood up once more and turned to face his window, watching his ninja running about to take care of errands. The afternoon sunlight bathed the village in a warm orange glow. He would have smiled at the sight were it not for the ruins everywhere. You are dismissed, dog. Dog saluted and disappeared in barely a whisper. Hiruzen observed his village for a few more seconds before looking once more at the sleeping baby, who was now clutching onto the wooden toy. Life won't be easy, Naruto. He closed his eyes as he could feel the weight of the world on his shoulders once more. He really was getting too old for this position. But I believe that you will be able to rise at the face of adversity. The Sandaime Hokage sat back down at his desk and began the long and tedious task of sorting through his paperwork. The little dog followed his master. Blue eyes squinted in slight frustration as they tried to read the words written in the children's book. Why was this so hard? All the other kids in the orphanage knew how to read this segment. But this page featured a few words that the young boy didn't recognize. He didn't mind too much, though. This was his favorite spot in the orphanage, behind one of the pillars that supported the housing for him and all the other orphans. Sitting down on the cool grass, fresh from morning dew and away from everyone else, listening to the sound of nature as the morning sun warmed up his body, it almost made him forget about everything else in the world. Frowning down at the book, the 4-year-old attempted to read the page once more. One more try. He knew he could do it. Hopefully he could finish this by lunchtime. Hey, brat. The blonde looked up, blinking a few times when the sunlight hit his eyeballs as 2 older kids walked up to him. It seemed he'd been found again. He'd have to find a new spot now. The taller of the 2, Kita, smiled down mockingly at the shorter boy. So this is where you've been hiding this whole time, huh? Glancing down at the object in the whiskered boy's hands, Kita's smile turned smug. You're still not done with this page? We've all finished this one yesterday. You're pretty hopeless, you know that? Those words hurt. He knew it was taking him longer than the others. But it's not like it was his fault or anything. Despite that, he tried his best to smile at the older boy. He'd heard the caretaker tell one of the other kids that smiling was a good way of cheering yourself up if you ever felt sad, plus, it made people like you more. It's not my fault the matron didn't help me at all. Suzu-sen says it's because you're a little nuisance. The other boy, Tori, if he recalled correctly, shot back. Suzu was the orphanage's nurse, and like every other adult in this place, their eyes held nothing but contempt for him. She says that she wishes that you weren't in this orphanage because you're nothing but trouble. If you asked me, they must have made a mistake bringing you here. It's must have. Tori narrowed his eyes. What? Naruto kept smiling politely. It's must have, not must have. Tori grit his teeth together in anger and took a step forward. You think you're clever, you little monster? The smile on Naruto's face dropped. I'm not a monster. The hell you aren't. Tori slapped the book out of Naruto's hand and grabbed onto his collar. I'll show you. What's going on here? All heads turned towards the new voice as Kimi, the matron of the orphanage, rounded on them. She must have heard Kita and Tori's yelling. No one usually ventures around this area so far away from everyone else. Matron! Kita exclaimed and pointed an accusatory finger at the shorter blonde. Naruto insulted Tori just because he wanted to help him with his reading. The matron turned furious eyes towards a now scared Naruto. You! She marched towards Naruto and roughly grabbed him by the wrist. What have I told you about bothering the other kids? But I didn't. Quiet. I don't want to hear anything out of you. She dragged him out of the courtyard and back into the hallway that led into his room. You stay in there and think about what you've done. I don't want to see your face again for the rest of the day. She shoved Naruto into his room and slammed the door closed as the small child stumbled in. Hearing the sound of a lock being turned from the outside, Naruto knew he could do nothing but comply. The matron was wrong. Smiling hadn't worked that time. Sighing as he flopped down onto his old mattress, Naruto felt around under his pillow and pulled out his treasure. A small wooden drum on a handle with 2 little beads attached on either side. He couldn't remember where he got it from, though it's been with him since the very beginning. He used his index and thumb to spin it back and forth from side to side and let the quiet drumming noise soothe him down. Shutting his eyes, he did his best to ignore his rumbling stomach. This was nothing new. Things had been like this ever since he's been here. The adults would look at him coldly and punish him for no reason, and the kids would follow along, blindly mimicking the grown-ups. No one told him why that was the case, though. Where were his parents? Why was he treated so differently? What could he have possibly done that the adult thought was so horrible that they treat him like an outcast? So many questions, and so little answers. He wanted to see the outside world. Explore what was beyond the brick walls that made up the perimeter of the building. He wanted to explore the trees that he could see in the distance. He wanted to see the markets that he could hear during the day when everything was quiet. He wanted a place where he could feel safe. Away from those cold eyes and harsh words. This place sucks. Hopefully, tomorrow will be a better day. Turns out he didn't have to wait that long. It hadn't taken much for the matron to finally snap. He was once more unfairly judged, and this time, Naruto hadn't wanted to take it quietly. He was so sick of smiling and pretending that everything was all right. For the first time, he'd had yelled back at her, shouting out his innocence, and trying to make her understand. He thought that maybe if he tried to stand up for himself, they would finally leave him be. They didn't. The whiskered boy stared back in the distance at the closed gates of the orphanage. Never in his wildest dreams did he think that they would throw him out to take care of himself. He was just glad that he'd kept his precious toy in his pocket that day. Turning his eyes towards the dirt road ahead of him, he frowned in uncertainty at the village that was laid out with twists and turns like some kind of rural maze. Now what? His feet began to take him forward, step by short step. He considered that question for a few moments. He obviously couldn't go back to the orphanage, and he didn't have any money. He could forage his own food, but he had no idea how to do that. Perhaps he could find a book on it. His reading skills had improved, so it shouldn't be a problem anymore. He was free now, after all. That sudden thought made him stop short. He was free! A toothy grin made its way to his face as he began to laugh softly to himself, which soon turned into a full-blown laugh of joy. His feet began to move again before he was even aware of it. Only this time it was much faster. He was running! And there were no pesky walls in his way that forced him to slow down, no angry looks that made him shy away. He kept running, the wind whipping at his face in a way he never felt before. He could feel his heart pumping as he sprinted down the dirt road and into the village. This was great. This was awesome. He was finally free from this orphanage, and he hoped that he would never see it again. He was tired of seeing the faces of those old caretakers. The faces of new people would be a refreshing change. He was sure of it. The villagers sucked. He didn't know why that was, but people glared at him here as well, and whispers followed him around wherever he went. At first, people were curious at the sight of a blonde child running around with clothes that were obviously several sizes too big for him. But one look at the whisker marks made them realize just who that blonde child was. Hey, isn't that? Yeah, it's that boy. I was wondering where he'd been all this time. Maybe he was hiding? TCH, he should have just stayed hidden if you asked me. Why does Sandaime-sama even let him stay here? I mean, he contains the... Quiet. We're not allowed to talk about that. The young Jinchuriki clenched his little fists and did his best to ignore the people around him. Right now, I need to focus on getting something to eat. If only it were that easy. He waited, holding his breath and eyes focused on his prize, like a hawk eyeing its prey. He'd been waiting for far too long for this to fail. He had one shot, and he had to make it count. Narrowing his eyes, he saw the guardian of his interest move away slightly as they tended to another customer. Now! A blonde blur suddenly shot forward and snatched the red apple right off the fruit rack before quickly rounding the corner and disappearing. What the hey? Get back here! The portly merchant attempted to run after the little boy, but he was just too fast for him. Bending down and resting his hands on his knee in an attempt to catch his breath, the merchant raised his fist angrily at the disappearing blur in the distance. You better not come back here. Hee hee, sucker. Naruto thought to himself victoriously as he clutched the apple close to his chest, making his way through the winding roads of the shopping district. Finally reaching his destination, he sat down against the wall of a back alley, where he usually stayed and slept. He grinned as he brushed the strands of hair out of his eyes. It had gotten pretty long during those 4 months of living in the streets, reaching nearly up to his shoulders. The now 5-year-old looked down at his hand holding the apple and promptly devoured it in mere seconds. Ah, that hit the spot. He smiled and patted his stomach in satisfaction. Standing up, the blond boy peeked over the corner, looking left and right for any signs of anyone. After finding nothing and pocketing his wooden toy, Naruto made his way out of his alley and onto the main streets of Konoha. This was his routine. In the morning he'd steal whatever food he could find, and after he was done enjoying his spoils, he would step out of hiding and explore the village. A drop of cold water landing on his nose startled him. Looking up, he saw that the scorching hot midday sun had quickly been hidden behind a sea of gray clouds. Another drop fell on his face, followed by another, and another, until the downpour increased in intensity, the rain bucketing down onto the unsuspecting villagers and merchants. Naruto smiled and looked at the sky through squinted eyes as he let the heavy rainfall wash his face. He didn't move from his position, even when the villagers around him shrieked and ran for cover, choosing to stretch his arms out on either side of him as if welcoming back an old friend. He didn't mind the rain. Dog nodded as the new recruit, Weasel, body flickered out of ANBU headquarters once their mission was finally complete. They had finally come home after a 5-month-long mission in the borders of IWA. The Hokage suspected that old fool Inoki would attempt to take advantage of Konoha's weakened state and send a battalion into the Hidden Leaves. Thankfully it seemed that IWA was still weary of Konoha after so many great wars. The Land of Fire may have been weakened, but it was still one of the mightiest great nations. Sighing, his thoughts drifted back to their new recruits, Weasel. His fighting style and use of genjutsu led him to believe that he was an Uchiha. And if his size was anything to go by, a very young Uchiha. He didn't have anything against the boy, quite the opposite in fact. His skills were nothing to scoff at, and he was extremely mature for his age, following orders and being polite to everyone. But he was just too damn young, damn it. They weren't in war times anymore, just what was Hokage-sama thinking? Sealing his ANBU gear away, Kakashi decided to step out for a walk, heedless of the pouring rain outside. He was ANBU, no amount of rain was about to scare him off. The rain was a nice change from the harsh heat of IWA, the sun beating down onto the earth until it turned red. He debated taking his favorite novel out, but decided against it. He wouldn't want the risk of his precious book getting soaked. His ears perked up as he could hear the humming of a young boy. Strange, children would normally run for cover when it was raining so hard. Looking ahead, he saw a small mop of shaggy blonde hair easily making his way through the rain. It seemed that this child didn't care about it either. That hair color almost looks like Sensei's. Kakashi chuckled to himself. There weren't a lot of people wearing this shade of blonde around here. Actually, the last time he saw this shade was when he visited Sensei's offspring in his cradle a few years ago. But that can't be Naruto, because Naruto is that he trailed off when said boy finally raised his head and brushed wet locks to the side, revealing his whisker marks. Son of a dash. Bang! Have you gone completely insane? The Sandaime Hokage didn't even bother looking up from his paperwork. Good evening, Kakashi, how nice of you to visit, you may enter, he said in a sarcastic tone. Don't give me that bullshit. Kakashi seethed. You promised me that you would keep Naruto safe in the orphanage. The Hokage raised his head and observed the ANBU commander for a few moments. And I did, he started slowly. Naruto is being taken care of by my best people. Then who the hell was that blonde homeless kid with whisker marks that I just saw, Sandaime? The temperature in the office seemed to drop several degrees. I beg your pardon? Naruto isn't in the orphanage. Kakashi narrowed his eye at the older man. He's all by himself near the meat market in the main square. You mean to tell me that you didn't know that? The professor stood up, face full of fury and eyes frigid. Bear! The bulky man that was known as Bear appeared, kneeling in front of his lord in an instant. Bring Kimi-says to my office. Make sure she is restrained. The ANBU nodded and disappeared. Kakashi, take me to Naruto right now. Kakashi frowned. He wasn't done chewing out the third, not even close. But right now, getting to Naruto was more important. Right. The third followed Kakashi through the rooftops at breakneck speed, each step they took sending splashes from the force of their jumps. It seemed that while he wasn't looking, the young Hatake had chosen to don his ANBU mask once more. After what seemed like an eternity, they finally arrived in the shopping market, which was empty save for a small figure that was currently facing away from them, wearing nothing but a simple t-shirt and shorts under the pouring rain. The boy was walking along the edge of a food stand, arms out on either side of him for balance, and humming a soft melody to himself. Dog remained silent as Hiruzen stepped forward and called out to the boy. Naruto! The small figure stopped humming and turned his head around. Pushing his wet hair out of his face, he observed the two newcomers that had just disturbed his peace. Who are you, old man? Splash! Hiruzen wondered how he had let things turn out the way they had. Splash! He was supposed to protect Naruto from a life or torment. Instead, what had happened? Naruto was forced out of the orphanage and became homeless, having had to resort to stealing for survival. What a joke. How could he ever face Minato in the afterlife now? Splash! Though he supposed that was a moot point, considering Minato was in the belly of the Grim Reaper himself. But even the yellow flash didn't scare him as much as Kushina Uzumaki. Oh, that woman was a fierce one. There was a good reason why she was dubbed the red-hot habanero in the academy. Splash! Speaking of women, the professor was shocked to discover what Kimi had done to Naruto. Kimi was someone that he once trusted with his life. He'd known her ever since the Second Shinobi War. She was a field medic, and once the war was over, she resigned as a ninja and opened an orphanage on the outskirts of the village. She took care of Asuma when he was little for God's sake. He didn't think she had it in her to hate an innocent boy. Splash! Kimi had lost her husband during the rampage of the Nine Tails. In hindsight, perhaps it wasn't such a good idea to have her take care of Naruto. But still, she was a former ninja. He expected better from her. Ninja usually understood that when a tailed beast was properly sealed into a vessel, said vessel remained who they were and was in no way influenced by the demon within. They were two separate entities sharing the same space. What a mess this has turned into. Splash! Naruto. Turning around, he looked at Naruto, who had jumped into yet another puddle in mild irritation. For his part, Naruto silently stared back at Sarutobi. What? He wasn't allowed to have his fun now. That was kind of unfair. Hiruzen sighed and turned back around, resuming his walk. He and Dog had found Naruto by himself near the food market. His first instinct, the one that raised children and taught students, was to make sure that Naruto was alright. But the young boy seemed adamant to remain out of reach. Surviving on his own for this long must have made the poor child wary of human contact. Sarutobi had asked Naruto to follow him to the Hokage Tower, which of course Naruto decided to ignore and make a run for it. After Dog had caught the elusive child once more, Hiruzen had to explain to him who he was. Naruto may have been a bit behind in his general history knowledge, but even he knew what a Hokage was. He was still staying well out of his reach, however. Dog had left after that, confirming that Naruto was safe once more. Which now brings us back to the present, with an old man walking through the rain and a child following several paces behind. How long have you been living on the street, Naruto? Naruto looked up at the wizened Hokage. I forget. How do you know my name? I've known you since you were a newborn. Now, do you happen to know why Kimi decided to throw you out? 'Cause she sucks. A pause. Does that mean you know my parents? Hiruzen nearly tripped on his own footing. What a perceptive boy. No, Naruto, I don't know who your parents are. Oh. The young boy went back to kicking the pebble he'd found on the ground. Hiruzen sighed once more. He supposed that was all he could get out of him for now. It only took 5 more minutes for them to arrive to the Hokage Tower, and after making their way inside, Hiruzen noticed a change in Naruto's behavior. Fists clenched at his sides, eyes nervously darting this way and that, he looked like a cornered animal. What's the matter? It's nothing. It wasn't nothing. Months of staying outside had forced survival instincts into the blond boy. He did not like this place. The corridor leading to the office was an open one-way area with no windows for emergency exits. And there were pictures hanging on the walls. God, why were there so many pictures? He always hated those. He swore he saw a painting come to life once. Sarutobi frowned but decided to let it go for now. He led the boy inside his office, closing the door behind them and choosing to ignore the way Naruto's eyes immediately darted to the closed window. Naruto, please take a seat. Some dry clothes will be brought in for you shortly. Naruto turned towards the older man. I don't want new clothes. You'll catch hypothermia if you keep those on. The boy tilted his head. Hyper what? Hiruzen sighed. You will catch a cold, Naruto. But these are my clothes. I know, and they will be returned to you. But for now, I don't want you to get my sofa wet. Naruto didn't say anything and chose to stand next to the window. When was the last time you cut your hair? I forget. Hiruzen shook his head tiredly. He didn't know what he expected talking to a 5-year-old boy. After fresh dry clothes had been brought in for Naruto, and Hiruzen had used some quick fire manipulation to dry his clothes, the Hokage's secretary, Eri, poked her head inside the office. Hokage-sama, Kimi is still in the waiting room. What should we do with her? Bring her in, please. Naruto, wait outside for a few minutes if you will. And do not run off. Eri, keep an eye on him. Eri nodded as Naruto begrudgingly made his way back into the hallway from hell. 5 minutes later. Naruto glanced up from his spot in the hallway and saw the orphanage matron coming out of the office, hands bound behind her back with an ANBU escorting her. He followed her retreating back with his eyes for a few seconds before entering the office once more when he heard his name being called. Where is the matron going? She will be charged for her crime. Expelling a child out of an orphanage without the Hokage's jurisdiction is a serious offense. Naruto frowned. He didn't understand half of those words, but as long as she was far away from him, then he didn't care. Naruto. The young boy looked up at the old man again. Kimi told me that she expelled you 4 months ago, coming on 5 months now. Why did you stay out for so long? Why didn't you come here to the Hokage Tower? He blinked in confusion. I didn't know what that was. You could have asked someone. I know the villagers aren't very friendly, but the patrolling shinobi would have helped you. Naruto frowned at that. I can't tell who's good or bad. I just avoided everyone and stayed hidden. Hiruzen sighed. I will arrange to have a home set up for you. He grabbed a stack of paper from his desk and began sorting through them. It will most likely be ready by tomorrow morning. So until then, you may stay here. The Jinchuriki's eyes widened. A house? He asked, surprised. Where? That depends entirely on what is available, my boy. He was getting a house. Just like that? He could hardly believe it. The old man was the Hokage, so he supposed it shouldn't be too hard for him to arrange something like that. But still, he doubted that this old man would just do that without expecting anything in return. Another thought crossed his mind as he sat down on the sofa. Don't people that live in houses have to pay for things? Like food and stuff? Don't you worry about that. I will come by every now and then to give you a monthly stipend until you are old enough to enroll as a shinobi. He gave a pointed look at Naruto. You do want to become a ninja, do you not? I think so. Splendid. The third Hokage stood up and picked up the pillow and blanket that Eri had left. It's getting pretty late, so why don't you go ahead and get some rest? He placed the blanket and pillow next to the blonde boy and went back to his desk. Tomorrow morning, we'll proceed with moving you into your new home. Naruto stared at the pillow for a few seconds. He'd never had one of those before. The orphanage didn't give him one. Okay, laying down on the couch, the Jinchuriki rested his head on the pillow and pulled the blanket over his head. It didn't take him long to fall asleep. When Hiruzen came back into his office at 6 a.m., he found the boy already awake, perched on his windowsill that overlooked the village and enjoying the morning sun. Naruto, get down from there. You'll fall off. Said boy glanced back at the old man and hopped off, closing the window behind him. Are we going to the new house now? The Hokage couldn't help but smile at the boy's eagerness. The papers are almost finished, so please, be patient for a few more minutes. He chuckled lightly at the boy's despondent look and walked over to his desk, already getting started on the stack of paperwork. 15 minutes later, the aged Kage noticed Naruto's head suddenly turning towards the door and staring at him intently. After a few seconds, the door opened and Eri popped her head in. Hokage-sama, the paperwork from last night is done. Interesting, the old monkey summoner thought to himself as he observed Naruto. Thank you, Eri. Naruto, we are leaving now. Follow me. The little boy hopped off the couch and quickly fell into step behind the Hokage. Coincidentally, Naruto's new house wasn't too far away from the back alley he used to sleep in. It was quite a modest thing. One small bedroom, a kitchen and living room combo and a bathroom with a stand-up shower. It wasn't much, but it was still a drastic improvement from his former living conditions. As Naruto was busy exploring his new living area, there were windows in every room. Thank God Hiruzen placed a small envelope on the kitchen counter. Naruto. Naruto came running out of his bedroom. Yeah, old man? I had a genin team furnish your house this morning. You'll find everything you need. I trust you know how to use an oven? Good. This here, he gestured towards the envelope, is your monthly allowance. Use it to buy yourself food and pay your bills every week. Those will only come around once a month, so make sure you don't spend your money on unnecessary things. If you have any questions or you need anything, then you can find me in the Hokage Tower, where we were this morning. Naruto looked over at the envelope before looking over at the living room. A couch was there, as was a dinner table and a few chairs. The bedroom had a bed and a nightstand as well as a cupboard. The kitchen was already full with plates, glasses, and silverware. There was a note on the kitchen cabinet that had a list of meats and vegetables he should buy. Even the bathroom already had a toothbrush and a tube of toothpaste. Naruto looked back over towards the Hokage, who was patiently waiting for Naruto to take everything in before finally voicing the question that's been niggling at his mind since the previous night. Why? Hiruzen stared at Naruto. Why what? Why are you doing all this? The house, the furnitures. Furnitures. Hiruzen corrected. Furnitures. Naruto frowned once more. You're even giving me money, and I know that's not normal. So why? The Hokage sighed and closed his eyes. Because Naruto, you are an orphan that's living in the street. It's not healthy, nor is it ethical. There are other orphans that don't have a place to live. What about them? You are a special case. Naruto squinted slightly. Does it have to do with why everyone hates me? That's enough, Naruto. Hiruzen turned away and made his way towards the front door. I will be back later with some groceries that you'll need in the future. For now, focus on getting settled in and exploring the rest of your house. And with that, the third Hokage was gone. Naruto frowned at the door and looked around his new place. Walking into his new bedroom, he reached inside his pocket and smiled when he looked at his little wooden drum. He walked over to his bed and kneeled down, hiding his toy under the mattress. He'd have to find a better hiding spot for it later on. And thus began Naruto's new life. I am so sick of vegetables. Naruto glared at the inside of his fridge in distaste. Lettuce, tomatoes, broccoli, cauliflower, carrots. And that god-awful celery. He recently found out that he hated celery. It's been 3 months since he moved into his new place. And while he was glad he didn't have to steal food anymore, he was tired of feeling like cattle. I think I have some money left in my allowance. Opening his new frog wallet, Gamachan, he peered inside and smiled in satisfaction once he saw what he had saved up. Turns out it was a good call after all. Now he could go out and splurge a little bit. Quickly throwing on his orange jacket that old man Hokage got for him, the young Jinchuriki opened his window and hopped out, shivering slightly when the cool night air hit his face. He loved this time of day. Despite the cold, the streets of Konoha were bustling with activity. The lights from street lamps and restaurants that were common after dusk gave nighttime a mystical feel, which was only enhanced with the faces of the previous Hokage staring down at the village like silent guardians. Speaking of Hokage, he didn't know what his opinion of the old monkey was. It definitely was a good one, though. He gave him food and shelter, and money to survive. He had stopped by several times to drop off groceries or to make sure he was alright. He was always nice to Naruto and gave him words of encouragement. He smiled at him instead of glaring at him. His constant presence made him a little more used to human interaction. Even though he was sure there was a deeper reason as to why the third Hokage was so nice to him, he couldn't really bring himself to care. Sometimes he wondered if... Wait, what was that smell? That delicious smell of meat being fried, eggs being cooked, dough being stretched and kneaded and cut into perfection, creating this heavenly aroma of perfectly blended ingredients. Following his nose, Naruto made his way to an unassuming little stand. He could see a man with graying hair and kind eyes working away and making delicious-looking bowls of something with a little brunette following him around and attempting to help where she could. He watched in amazement as the cook expertly placed the meat and narutomaki on top of noodles and broth along with some herbs and garnish before sliding the bowl on the counter and serving a drooling customer. He was so amazed in fact that he almost missed when the cook waved at him. Crap! Quickly turning around, he was about to run for it when he heard him call out to him. Hey, it's alright. Leaning back, he peeked inside the stand again and saw the noodle chef grin at him while waving him over. Ya hungry, kid? That had never happened before. Usually, merchants and cooks chased him out, not invited him in. This could still be a trap, he had to be careful. Naruto cautiously made his way over to the table and stood on his tippy toes to be able to see over the counter. The noodle guy gave him a kind smile. Have a seat. What flavor would you like to try? We've got pork, miso, tonkatsu, vegetab. Miso, please. Naruto quickly interrupted as he climbed up onto the stool. The cook grinned at him and went to work. Miso it is. The young blonde watched the chef get started on a new bowl. Placing the meat on the grill, he began stirring the broth that was boiling away in a pot and dropped an egg into a second pot. It was amazing, no movements were wasted. Each action were made with the sole purpose of completing the task as quickly and efficiently as possible. Daddy, I want to help too. Naruto looked over as the same brunette from before rushed in and tugged on the hem of the older man's shirt. The cook chuckled and patted her head. Sure I am, why don't you chop some peppers for me? The little girl I am cheered and rushed to get the task completed. Be careful with the knife, he added quickly. Naruto smiled slightly at the sight. Is this what having a parent was like? It looked nice. It only took 5 more minutes for the bowl to be ready. Here we are, 1 bowl of miso ramen for the little mister, the cook said jovially as he placed the bowl in front of Naruto. Ramen? Naruto asked curiously, deeply inhaling the smell of the heavenly dish. The ramen cook suddenly turned back around, startling the young boy. You mean to tell me you've never had ramen before? At the blonde's head shake, the cook smiled at Naruto once more. What's your name, kid? Naruto. Naruto Uzumaki. The cook chuckled. Uzumaki, eh? Naruto nodded. Interesting name. The blonde looked up at him curiously. Well, Naruto, you can call me Tuchi. And this over here is my daughter, Ayam. He gestured behind him at the little girl that was putting some of the pots away. And as celebration for letting me serve you your first bowl of ramen, this one's on the house. Really? Thanks, Teshi. Tucci's eyebrow twitched as Naruto mispronounced his name, and watched him break his chopsticks apart. Thank you for the meal. The hungry blonde picked up a few strings of noodles with his chopsticks, and quickly slurped them up. Whoa, this ramen stuff is amazing. Tucci smiled proudly as Naruto began shoveling the ramen in his mouth like a starving man. He's just like Kushina, he thought to himself fondly. Hey daddy, I can't find the spatula. I rushed up to Tucci and noticed the young customer. Oh my gosh, your whiskers are so cute, the 9-year-old exclaimed. Naruto paused, an indignant look appearing on his face as his cheeks reddened slightly in embarrassment. They're not whiskers, they're birthmarks, I think. He mumbled that last part to himself. Whatever, your whiskers are still cute, Mr. Whiskers. The whiskered boy groaned as he went back to his ramen. Tucci, who was watching the interaction, chuckled to himself. Naruto, he called out, getting the blonde's attention. The chef smiled at him. You will always be welcome here. A warm, alien feeling bloomed in his stomach, and he could feel his eyes begin to sting a little. Tea, thank you, Tucci-san. He quickly brought the bowl to his lips and pretended to drink from it to hide his moistening eyes. Maybe things weren't so bad after all. So you're guarding the Uzumaki kid now, eh? What did you do to get stuck with that, Yuzuki? A man with a bandana queried playfully as he chewed on the samban in his mouth. Genma chided a woman with red eyes and curly black hair. It's alright, Kurinai. Yuzuki replied and smiled at Genma. I requested to. You requested to? Another man wearing shades asked in surprise. I thought you only lived for the missions and all that stuff. What happened? Her last mission went south. Hate, answered Aoba's question. Yugao, who was holding his hand in hers, squeezed it a little too tight, making Hate wince slightly. It did not, Yugao said in a warning tone to her boyfriend. I just needed a change of scenery. Taking mission after mission is having its toll on me. A man with a heavily scarred face laughed at that, making accusing eyes turn to him. Don't even get me started on you, mister. I opted out of a mission because I had a stomachache. Rado's laugh abruptly stopped. I did, he shouted indignantly, making Yugao roll her eyes. Still, said Kurinai? Don't you think it's a bit boring? I know that Naruto boy isn't exactly like the other kids, but he is still one. It's not that bad, said the purple-haired swordsman as she took a sip from her drink. It's interesting to see him interact with people. He's a good kid. A bit jumpy, and a bit of a troublemaker, but he's definitely not how people paint him out to be. The gathered table of Jonin was silent for a few seconds. Wait, does he even know he's being guarded? Genma asked suddenly. Yugao shook her head. No, we are under strict orders to stay hidden. Unless he notices us, which is unlikely, we cannot directly interact with him. Genma hummed thoughtfully before turning towards Rado. So, any idea where the others are? Asuma and Anko are out on a mission, the scarred man began. And last I heard, Guy got a mini-me, he finished with a shudder. A mini-me? Yeah, he sighed and downed the rest of his sake. An apprentice. He's making him wear the same horrid stuff as well. And Kakashi? Yo. Everyone turned around to see a familiar masked face. Kakashi, Aoba greeted. Did you hear that Yugao is babysitting kids now? Oh. The Jonin wearing shades yelped as he received a kick in the shin under the table. Kakashi's eye curled up into a smile. Oh, I know. She's my partner. Everyone stared at Kakashi in surprise, save for Yugao, who laughed quietly to herself. You mean to tell me that the Hokage saw fit to assign one of our best ANBU to a babysitting job? Kakashi nodded. Why? I requested to, he answered, and was rewarded with the stupefied faces of his friends. Ah, he really did love messing with them. Naruto had made up his mind. He was going to become a ninja. He'd thought long and hard about that ever since the old man Hokage asked him 5 months ago. On one hand, being a ninja was probably super dangerous. They played with sharp stuff and spat out fireballs. But on the other hand, they played with sharp stuff and spat out fireballs. How cool was that? Of course, that wasn't his only reason. He wanted to become strong. Strong enough to protect those he cared about. Strong enough to protect himself. Stronger than anyone. He wanted to be just like his idol, the 4th Hokage. Now he was a true hero in his eyes. He died protecting what was important to him. He fought against a natural disaster, and killed it. I'm telling you, Taji, I got my Nii-san to show me how to unlock chakra. The whiskered boy stopped in his tracks and peeked behind a tree. He was at a random training ground right now, hoping to maybe find stray weapons he could start practicing with. But this sounded much too interesting to ignore. Eh? No way, I don't believe you. It's true. The first kid that looked about 10 years old exclaimed. You wanna see? A girl with bluish hair looked uncertainly between her two friends. I don't know, Isao, maybe we should wait until we have an adult with us. It doesn't seem safe. Isao just grinned at her confidently. Don't worry, Yui, it'll be fine. He sat down and crossed his legs. I think he said you have to meditate like this and look deep within yourself, then you'll feel it. Taji looked skeptic. And then? Then you just pull it out. The girl looked as unconvinced as Taji. Is it really that easy? Must be. Nissan wouldn't lie to me. There was a slight rustle next to them behind the tree and 3 sets of heads turned towards the noise. What was that? Taji asked and quickly ran behind the tree to take a look. Huh! There's no one there. The shortest of the 3 kids looked towards his friends, who just shrugged in similar confusion. Look deep within yourself, Naruto thought to himself, as he sprinted his way back to his home. All I have to do is close my eyes and look for it. He grinned. How hard could it be? The answer is pretty hard. Naruto had been trying to meditate and look for that damn feeling for the past 20 minutes, and he still couldn't feel anything. He was beginning to think that the kid from the training ground had lied. But Uzumaki Naruto was nothing if not stubborn. He never gave up. He never had so far and he never will. So once more, he sat down with his legs crossed and concentrated. Come on, you bastard, the blonde muttered to himself. He squeezed his eyes shut as his face scrunched up in concentration. Show yourself, damn it. Gah, still nothing. Maybe he should wait. Was that it? He could definitely feel something warm in the pit of his belly now. That must be it. Now all he had to do was grab it and pull it out. He attempted to do just that, reaching for it and pulling hard. He didn't expect it to pull back, however. What was happening? The feeling felt hot now, too hot. It was painful, like acid boiling in his stomach. He didn't like that. He must have done something wrong. He tried letting go of it, but it was too late. The burning feeling seemed to consume him, and the acid began to spread through his body. He tried to scream, call out for help, but it seemed his voice had left him as well. All he could do was squirm in agonizing pain. And just like that, the pain was gone. Gasping, he took in big gulps of air as he caught his breath. Where was he? He definitely wasn't in his room anymore. He was somewhere wet, and dark and cold. Wherever he was, he didn't like it. And what was up with that giant metal cage in front of him? A single red eye opened in the dark. But it was big, way too big to be a person or an animal. And it looked very angry too. A sudden pressure crashed onto his shoulders, forcing him to his knees, but nothing was touching him. This was much worse than before. He couldn't breathe, his thoughts were reduced to unintelligible garbles. He saw flashes in his mind of the infinite possible ways he could die right now. But even through all of that, he heard it. A voice so deep and loud he could feel it reverberate everywhere in this strange place, and echo inside his head, like a recording of metal meeting gravel cranked up to 1,000. You are not welcome here, Warden. The shivering blonde felt himself being forced out of wherever the hell this was, and he suddenly found himself on the floor of his apartment once more, with sweat drenching his clothes and eyes unfocused. He gasped for air as he sat up into a sitting position, trying his best not to throw up his lunch. What the fuck was that? Sleep had eluded him that night. His mind kept going back to the events that had happened within the last 10 hours. Every time he fell asleep, he saw that eye. That cold, angry eye that seemed to hold so much hatred inside. And that feeling. He shivered at the mere memory of it. Whatever that thing was, it had called him Warden. That word was familiar, though he couldn't remember what it meant. Perhaps he'd read it in one of his books? He'd have to look it up later on. He sat up in his bed when he heard his front door open. Can I come in? That sounded like the old Hokage. Getting off his bed, he walked out of his room and into his living room, where he watched as the old man placed an envelope on his kitchen counter. This is for this month's living expenses. The young boy looked at the envelope in slight contempt. He hated this. Well, not really, he was grateful to have a home now, and that someone cared enough to come by every month to make sure he was still alive. But he hated living like this. He hated not having anyone to talk to about his problems. He hated how the Hokage, who looked like he cared for him on the surface, seemed to be hiding things from him. He definitely couldn't tell the Hokage about what had happened the previous night. He had a feeling that things would end badly if he did. Sarutobi watched the boy for a few seconds before making his way back to the front door once he saw that he would remain silent. Hey, the Hokage paused in front of the door and turned to the young blonde as Naruto tilted his head back to look at him. Why don't I have a mom and dad? A memory made its way inside the old man's mind, of a blonde Hokage and hot-blooded redhead impaled on the claw of a great beast. Hiruzen closed his eyes tiredly. Didn't I tell you before? He asked the blonde. Although it was quite some time ago. That's not what I want to hear. The Jinchuriki interrupted as he looked angrily at the Hokage. You're talking about when that beast called the nine-tailed fox ran amok, right? Hiruzen kept staring at the blonde as he continued. That's not what I'm asking about. I just want to know. Naruto got up and stared at him heatedly. Who were my parents? What kind of people were they? The Hokage so desperately wanted to tell the boy about his parents, but he couldn't. Not yet anyway. Not because he was worried about potential enemies, no. Konoha could protect him from that. But because he thought that the blonde wouldn't be able to handle it. He wanted to tell him about the Nine Tails one day, and if he learned that his own father had condemned him to a life of misery, he wasn't sure how he'd react. An image of Minato hugging his wife's pregnant belly appeared in his mind. No, he couldn't tell him. He couldn't take the risk of having Naruto come to hate his parents and his village. Not when they had loved him more than the world itself, even before he was born. He turned away and put his hand on the doorknob. There's no use asking about that. It won't bring the dead back. Naruto frowned at Sarutobi's retreating back. More lies. He always knew when people lied to him. They never looked him in the eyes when they did. Right before the Hokage was about to leave, Naruto remembered his train of thought before the old man had come in. Hey, old man, he said quickly. Sarutobi opened the front door and paused halfway inside the doorway. Naruto continued. What does warden mean? Hiruzen looked sharply at the Jinchuriki. Why would the boy ask such a question? Had someone told him about the Nine Tails? Who would do such a thing? Perhaps it was just a coincidence. Hiruzen knew that the blonde liked to read to increase his vocabulary. Maybe he'd read that word in one of those books of his? Hopefully. A warden is a person that's responsible for someone or something's supervision. And with that, the old man was gone. Naruto stared at the door. He wasn't sure what supervision was, but he had an idea. So that thing that had called him warden, Naruto was in charge of it? But that didn't make sense, he'd never seen it before. He knew he'd remember something like that if that were the case. He needed to meet it again. As scary as it was, as painful as it was, he needed answers. God, he was crazy. He knew that if things went wrong in the future, that he would be able to pinpoint it to exactly right now. Here he was, sitting cross-legged in his living room once more, about to attempt what had ended terribly the last time he tried this. He needed to find that feeling deep inside himself again. He closed his eyes and concentrated. There it was, that warm feeling that had lulled him into a false sense of security. He imagined a hand wrapping around that feeling, but unlike last time, he didn't pull and try to force it out and instead let it guide him deeper into his mind. He opened his eyes and was met with the same metal bars from last time. So, he was back. Just what was this place? How could something inside himself lead him to somewhere else? Was this inside his mind? He had never heard of anyone being able to do that before. There was that eye again, but there were two of them this time. Those eyes within the darkness that seemed to look at him with such hatred. Was it angry because it was caged? He had a feeling that he'd be angry as well if he were stuck behind bars for so long. The same feeling from last time made him gasp and collapse to his knees as cold sweat began to form on his forehead. No! He didn't want to leave yet. He didn't even know what that thing was. He hadn't come all the way out here for nothing. I thought I'd warned you. The deep booming voice mumbled angrily. Are you as dense as you look? Please, the blonde managed to get out as he took in shaky breath. Wait, please. The beast was silent for a few moments before the pressure suddenly abated. Speak, warden. Naruto gasped once he was able to get his bearings again as he fell onto his backside, greedily gulping down some much-needed oxygen. Thank you? The red eyes seemed to be observing him with impatience, so the whiskered boy hurriedly, albeit shakily, stood back on his feet. Who are you exactly? A wide, terrifying grin appeared within the darkness of the cage, sharp white teeth, each several times bigger than he was coming to life beneath the twin nightmarish red orbs. So, the little human is curious about me, HM? The creature gave a deep humorless laugh. Should I feel honored? It asked in a tone that was practically dripping with sarcasm. Naruto began to shiver in panic as the glowing eyes appeared to be floating up higher and higher, staring at him from what looked like hundreds of feet high. You want to know who I am, mortal? Then I'll tell you. Some of the darkness within the cage began to fade, giving Naruto a better view of the beast inside. Orange fur, razor-sharp teeth, blood-red eyes. But that wasn't what scared the boy the most. He stared in horror at the 9 swishing tails behind the giant fox. I am the Kyuubi, the 9-tailed demon fox, and mightiest of the Bija. The fox gave the blonde a menacing grin. It took all of Naruto's willpower not to pass out right then and there. He was face to face with the 9-tailed fox? The same fox that could create tidal waves and hurricanes with merely a swipe of its tails? The same fox that nearly destroyed his home village and killed the greatest Hokage they ever had? He tried to look at things rationally. The Kyuubi was unable to touch him from there. Those bars were there for a reason, and he had a feeling that if the 9 tails could take them down, then he would have done so already. Now he had even more questions than before. What was the strongest Bija doing here? The 9-tailed fox? He stuttered. But how is that possible? I thought that the fourth killed you. A giant hand smashed against the metal bars, making the cage creak and rattle as Naruto jumped back in fright. You think that pathetic fool of a yondaime could ever defeat me? The nine tails roared in anger. None in this world could ever come close to me. You are nothing but ants in front of my might. Naruto gulped audibly as he stared at the visage of the demon fox. Then, what happened? The mighty demon sat back down as it huffed angrily to himself. That blasted Namake sealed me away, into a pathetic twerp of all things. The nine tails' eyes narrowed as it looked at his warden. I was so close to ending your miserable existence. But that damned Uzumaki, she held me down with her pesky chains before I could finish the deed. Uzumaki? There was another Uzumaki before him. He'd always thought he was just given a random name. Wait, what was that about sealing? What do you mean by sealed you away? Are you saying that you're sealed inside of me? Is that why you called me warden before? The young blonde babbled. The great Bijou cast him an annoyed glare. I grow tired of your presence, morsel. Begone. Wait, before he could say anything else, he felt that same feeling from yesterday of being forcefully pushed out of his mindscape. He could kick him out of his own mind. That was so not fair. Naruto woke up with a groan as he sat up again and held his throbbing head. His brain was spinning with even more questions. He had learned a lot, but now new questions had arisen. The freaking nine tails was inside of him. And the fourth hadn't killed him at all, he had sealed it into him. Was that why the entire village seemed to hate him? Was that why people whispered behind his back and the old man treated him so differently? Did the Hokage even know? He had to. He was the Hokage. The blonde reached under his mattress and held his little drum for comfort. Why did he keep something like that from me? What else is he hiding? I bet he does know who my parents are, but he just doesn't want to tell me. Well, two could play at that game. If the leader of this village would keep things away from him, then so would he. The nine tails had said something about an Uzumaki. All this time, he thought that it was just a made-up name given to him because no family wanted him. But there were others like him. Were there any still alive? He squeezed his eyes shut as he mentally replayed his encounter with the fox. The fourth, his idol, was the one that had sealed the QB inside of him. He didn't know how to feel about that. Even if the fourth hadn't had a choice, why was he chosen of all people? This was all too much for the blonde. Thinking about it just gave him an even bigger headache. And I still have that damn chakra to unlock, he lamented to himself. With a sigh, he forced himself back into a sitting position and closed his eyes once more. There was that warm feeling of the nine tails again. He briefly considered going back in, but he had a feeling that the fox wouldn't like that. So instead he pushed past the warm feeling of the fox and started digging deeper. Yes, he could feel it now. There was something else within. If he had to associate the demon's feeling to a color, it would definitely be red. But this one felt calmer and cooler, like the color blue. He once again pictured a hand closing around it when a thought made him stop in his tracks. What would happen if he tried pulling this one out? What if he had another secret demon inside of him, and this was what that feeling was? No, he wouldn't back down now. Even if it was another demon, then he would meet it head on. Now determined, he finally grasped the blue sensation and pulled hard on it. The damn thing wouldn't budge. While it didn't violently pull back like the red color, this one just would not move at all. Gritting his teeth, he pictured a second hand wrapping around it and began to pull with all his might once more. Yes. He could feel it wobbling slightly. He was so close now, all he had to do was keep pulling. And he kept doing just that, pulling and pulling as hard as he could for several minutes. And finally, after one final tug, he felt it give. Chakra exploded out of him and knocked his surrounding furniture over. He could feel this warm, comforting sensation flowing around his body, revitalizing him and making him feel stronger and healthier than he ever had in his short life. He had done it. He'd unlocked his chakra. Standing up, he marveled at this newfound feeling. He felt like he could run for miles and lift mountains. But the question was, what would he do now with this power? An idea came to his head as a mischievous smile blossomed onto his face. He's over there. Get him. I'm gonna skin you alive, you little terror. Naruto laughed as he jumped on top of another building. This chakra stuff was great. He could jump from roof to roof now, and he could outrun everyone. Even those people with the green vests that always gave him trouble before were left behind in his dust. For the past 3 hours, he'd been pulling prank after prank, terrorizing the villagers and ninja alike. No one who scorned him was safe from him. He could remember every faces, every nasty insult, and every store owner that had chased him out. One had had the front of his store graffitied with big bold text saying "stupid" and "butthead." Another civilian had walked home only to be met with a pie being launched out of his opposing wall and nailing him in the face. Looking back, he saw that some of the people with green vests were catching up with him as he did his best to contain his laughter. One of them was bright pink. Another one was covered in feathers and looked like a giant chicken. Quickly hopping off the building and ducking into an alleyway, he waited until all of his pursuers were out of sight before finally coming out with a satisfied smile. Hee hee. That'll show them not to mess with Naruto Uzumaki. A crash behind him startled him as he whirled around. A man in a green vest and a long scar running along the bridge of his nose stumbled out from behind some trash cans, panting in exhaustion from chasing after him all day. I finally found you, he panted out in between breaths. Naruto smiled at him challengingly and took off once more. No, you didn't. Hey, get back here! He yelled out uselessly. He blinked in surprise though when the 5-year-old skidded to a stop and after a moment's pause, cautiously made his way back towards the man in the green vest. Oh, you actually did. Naruto tilted his head. Yeah. The young Chunin scratched his head in confusion and looked around uncertainly. Well, alright, I guess we're going to the Hokage's office now. Follow me. The man turned around and began to make his way towards the Hokage building, entirely missing the grin on Naruto's face. Element of surprise. The blonde pulled a water balloon off of his belt and flung it at the man, who turned around in surprise and spluttered as the balloon exploded in his face. Ag! The older man yelled as he fell onto his backside. He frantically wiped his face and opened his eyes to berate the little trickster only to realize he was already long gone. Up above on the roofs, 2 masked figures observed the scene below in amusement. Lively kid. The one in the weasel mask said with a small chuckle. The Ambu in the dog mask just smiled. Today had been awesome. He'd gotten some sweet revenge on those annoying villagers that would always be mean to him. Right now, though, he was tired. He looked like quite the sight. Paint and scuff marks adorned his clothes and his hair stuck to his forehead from the sweat. He was looking forward to get home, shower and collapse onto his bed. Man, where did that troublesome kid go? Naruto stopped and looked up as a voice drew his attention. There was an unassuming man with black hair and another one of those green vests. The man was looking around in search of something before sighing as he brought his hands together, hands closed save for his index and middle fingers that extended out to make a cross sign. It can't be helped. Shadow Clone Jutsu. A puff of smoke appeared next to him, surprising Naruto. His eyes nearly fell out of his sockets when he saw an exact copy of the black-haired man next to him. You go this way. I'll check out this area over there. The clone nodded as he and the original vanished in different directions. Naruto looked on in amazement. The plan was to go home, take a shower and get some much-needed rest, but what he had witnessed earlier had made him way too excited. There was a technique that could make clones. What else could ninja do? The potential of chakra felt limitless. So here he was, standing in his living room once more as he stared at the ground in front of him with determined eyes. He had chakra now, so he could do this as well, right? If that man from before managed to do it, then he could too. Balling his fists at his sides, the blonde grinned in anticipation. Shadow Clone Jutsu. Huh! The boy stared in confusion as nothing happened. Was he supposed to do something else? Now that he thought back to it, the man had made a strange symbol with his hands. Maybe that was the missing piece? It's not like he had anything to lose. Crossing his fingers together just like how he saw the ninja do, he felt his chakra fluctuate in his body in an unfamiliar way. Shadow Clone Jutsu. He called out, even louder than before. A puff of smoke appeared in front of him as he felt a wave of dizziness. Damn, why did he suddenly feel so tired? Blinking, he stared at the spot where the smoke had come from. There was nothing there. Had he done the technique incorrectly? A squeaky, high-pitched voice startled him as glanced around his room in confusion. Hello? Down here. The blonde Jinchuriki looked down and was surprised to find himself. Except he was much smaller than him. Why are you so tall, you bastard? His mini-clone yelled at him angrily. The real Naruto could only stare in astonishment. I'm not tall, you're the one that's small. What the hell happened? The tiny clone crossed his arms in indignation as it opened his mouth to give a smart reply only to disappear in another puff of smoke. Naruto stared at the spot that his clone was just standing in as his tired brain attempted to process what had just happened. 3 months had gone by for our favorite blonde, and life went on as usual. The Hokage came by to give him his allowance. Naruto terrorized the villagers by doing his new favorite pastime, pranking, and on his own time, Naruto had been doing some studying on his own. Turns out there is a whole island of Uzumakis. Well, there was. Not anymore. The island of Uzushiogakure had been eradicated during one of the wars, leaving only ruins to show that they had once been a prospering village within the land of whirlpools. Rumors has it that there were survivors that had managed to flee during the attack, obviously, given that he was here now. But as feeble as it was, hope began to take life inside of Naruto that other members of his family had managed to survive as well. Another thing that he had learned was that each major village had people that held demons in them, or Jinchurikis, as they called them. While the thought that there were others out there who were just like him made him happy, he couldn't help but wonder how they were being treated over there. I hope they're alright, thought the blonde sadly. He wanted to meet them one day. He was sure that they could become friends. He needed more answers about why he had been chosen. A passing book in the library about the fourth had told him that Minato Namikaze had a genin team before he was anointed as the Hokage. Uchiha Obito, deceased. Noira Rin, deceased. Hatake Kakashi, Jonin of Konohagakure. This Kakashi person might know something about the Yandame's decision. He hoped so at least. A soft knock on his front door shook him out of his musings. Glancing at his clock, he saw that it was 9:38 p.m. Who could it be at this time? Slowly patting his way to the front door, he stopped in front of it as he pressed an ear to it. Who is it? No answer. That was weird. He slowly reached up for his handle and opened the door a crack, peeking his head behind the frame. No one there. But there was a package on the floor with writing scribbled on it that read to Naruto. His interest having been piqued, he opened the door fully and picked up the package in his small hands. Glancing from side to side once more, he turned back around once he saw no one and closed the door behind him. What is this? He stared at the package for a few seconds, suspicion steadily rising as he thought of what could be inside of this unassuming package. After shaking it gently and confirming that the material inside was soft and nothing dangerous, he ripped it open as a note fell out of it. He picked up the note curiously and opened it. For those cold winter days. Happy birthday, Naruto. Birthday, yes, he'd heard that word before. Kids in the orphanage had used it several times, though he never really thought that he could have one as well. It made sense now that he thought about it. He glanced over to the calendar that was hanging from his wall. So October 10th was his birthday then? Placing the card down, he opened the package further to reveal a blue scarf with lines running horizontally across the fabric that were a lighter shade of blue. It's so soft, he thought as he wrapped it around himself and marveled at the warmth it seemed to give him. But who would give him this scarf? There wasn't anyone behind the door. Running to his window, he threw it open as he looked around the dark street in the hopes of finding this mysterious person. Unfortunately, the area was barren at this time of night. Inhaling, Naruto cupped his hands around his mouth to project his voice even further. Thank you? He yelled out into the night. He waited a few seconds in the hopes that he would get an answer back. Nope. Nothing but the wind. With a small sigh, he ducked back inside and closed his window. Hiding a few meters away within the darkness, the single visible eye of a certain masked man curved up into a smile. It was horrible. Everyone in this underground bunker looked like sick caricatures of what used to be humans. Everywhere he looked, victims of failed experiments moaned in agony or stared lifelessly at nothing in particular. The ones that were still conscious enough to speak were barely aware enough to give off unintelligent mumbles. Men, women, even children, none were spared from the cruel treatment. That monster, how far is he willing to go for his twisted ambitions? Captain? The newly promoted 13-year-old captain of ANBU tore his eyes away from the gruesome sight before him in favor of turning his attention towards his subordinate, a man in a tiger mask with medium-sized brown hair that was tied up in a spiky ponytail. What do we have? It seems that all these people have been forcefully paired with some kind of artificial nature energy. The tiger ANBU looked down at the clipboard in his hands. None of them could properly wield it as the natural chakra rebelled against them, so Orochimaru attempted to modify their bodies to be able to properly sustain it, leading to this. He gestured towards the horrific amalgamates. My God, Kakashi thought to himself in disgust. Is that lunatic trying to replicate Jiraiya-sama's sage mode? These are only the beginning stages. The tiger mask continued. After a few days, they devolve into basic instinct. Hunt, kill, eat. The mark on their bodies release some kind of enzyme into their system that makes them turn wild and feral. They become extremely dangerous and will attack anything on sight. Have we tried removing the mark? The team commander asked. That's the thing, Sir. Tiger looked uneasily at the disfigured victims. The mark seemed to hold a piece of Orochimaru's soul. It's impossible to remove it. It wasn't looking good. Kakashi stared hopelessly at what he assumed was a young female clutching a crying infant to her side. Have any of the recovered bodies turned back to normal? None, sir. All of these people are done for. The subordinate replied grimly. The gray-haired ANBU squeezed his eyes shut as he debated what to do. He slowly walked over to the huddled figure of the young girl he saw before and crouched down to her level. She didn't seem to notice him. The deformed experiment was slowly rocking her child and muttering a lullaby as her empty eye sockets stared right through him. He knew what he had to do. But could he do it? Could he really take the lives of these poor tortured souls? They hadn't done anything yet. They didn't deserve to die. They were just civilians living their lives who fell victim to a twisted man's corrupted desires. But it was too late for them. The kindest thing he could do now was to end their misery, but he didn't think he could do it. Reaching down to his hip, he pulled off the dog mask that was attached to his belt and stared at the visage of his title. Was this what it meant to be NBU? To do whatever it took to protect Konoha? To do what no one else could do for the sake of the others? Kakashi always knew that being the captain of the Black Ops was a cruel thing, but this was the first time that he actually saw just what this position entailed. Please, his attention was taken off his mask as he looked over at the girl that had finally noticed his presence. Please help us. He would help these people. No matter how hard or painful it was, he would do what needed to be done. Looking at his mask once more, he flipped it around and brought it to his face. Kakashi, no. He wasn't Kakashi anymore. He was Dog now. With this mask, he was the ANBU captain of Alpha Division. Dog reached up to the handle poking out behind his left shoulder and grabbed onto it, pulling on it to free the blade from its sheath. If this was what being an ANBU meant, then he would do it without complaining. He would turn off his emotions and do what was necessary to complete the mission. Because if he didn't, then who would? He'd take on the full brunt of this responsibility, because he was ANBU. He was Dog, the protector of Konoha. The ANBU captain drove his blade in the heart of the girl, who died painlessly a few seconds later. With shaky hands, he began his grueling task, and he didn't stop. Even when they screamed in terror. Even when they begged for mercy. Even when the children cried for their parents. Because that is what was necessary. Wake up, Kakashi! Kakashi jolted awake. Tiredly opening his eye, he blearily looked at the face of his colleague with the bird mask. It's 6:43 p.m. I know it's part of that persona of yours to be late, but Cat has been waiting for you for nearly an hour. With a groan, the scarecrow sat up in his bed and rubbed at his only exposed eye. He was normally an extremely light sleeper, something that has been developed as a necessity given his field of work. But every now and then, he'd have one of those nightmares. Memories of his worst moments within his life. He glanced at his now opened window near his bed. Bird must have gotten in from there. Thank you, Bird. The young Hatake reached over to his nightstand and grabbed his dog mask. Standing up, he placed his mask onto his face and clipped it into place. Bird immediately stood straighter and saluted. At your command, Captain? Dismissed. Dog checked his pouch as Bird vanished out of the window. After making sure he had everything, he too disappeared from his room. Ow, 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 ow. Yes, it was finally ready. After waiting all of 3 minutes, the food of the gods was finally ready. Well, a substitute to it, at least. Holding the boiling cup of noodles, the young Jinchuriki quickly made his way to his dinner table, almost throwing it onto it because of the heat. Once his torturous trip was finally over, he blew onto his hands in an attempt to ward off any burns. It'll heal. It always does. Sitting down on a chair, he eagerly broke his chopsticks and brought his hands together. Thank you for the meal. With that done, he could finally dig in. The cup of noodles never stood a chance. In merely a minute, the cup that once contained the heavenly dish had been completely emptied. Another easy victory for Uzumaki Naruto. Closing his eyes, he savored the feeling of his warm meal. It was a cool night out today, but he didn't mind it. Smiling, he ran a hand through his brand new scarf that he now wore around his neck. He had to find out who gave it to him so he could thank them properly. He closed his eyes and cleared his thoughts. Yes, there they were. He could barely feel them, but they were definitely there. It's not like they were making a big effort to hide themselves anyway. He knew of those masked people that would often be in the vicinity of his house. He had a feeling they were sent by the Hokage. The Jinchuriki had to be protected after all. When had he developed the sixth sense? He had no idea. But he had a feeling it came from living on the street for a few months. It had forced his sense of survival to the max. It wasn't anything amazing, he could only kind of feel things that were in his immediate area. But still, he thought it was an awesome skill to have. He didn't know why, but one of those masked figures made him feel safe, almost as if he already knew him. Hey, just because the Hokage made him cautious didn't mean that he had to be scared of the people protecting him, right? Opening his eyes, he smiled as he rushed towards his kitchen once more, pulling another cup ramen out of his cupboard and putting it to boil. They must get pretty hungry, being up on the roofs for so long with nothing to eat. After 3 more minutes, the cup ramen was ready. Making sure to use oven mitts this time to not burn himself, he brought it to his windowsill and carefully placed it down. Well, that sucked, no one was coming down to get it. Maybe he'd been wrong and no one was there? He shrugged and made his way back to his living room. They'll take it whenever they see it. He needed to find that Kakashi guy. He was sure that he would be able to tell him more about why he was chosen as the jailer of the 9 Tails. Plus, being the student of the 4th, he had to be strong. Maybe he could get the Jonin to train him? He wanted to know. He needed to become stronger. If he was going to become a strong shinobi one day, then he'd need training, lots of training. And he had a feeling it wasn't going to be easy. Yes, tomorrow, he would find him. and he would find his answers. His eyes went back to his windowsill. What the cup ramen was gone. And they didn't even say thank you, how rude of them. Running over towards his window, he leaned his upper body outside and took a deep breath. You're welcome. He couldn't have sounded more sarcastic even if he tried. But he was only greeted with silence. Whoosh. The world rushed past him in a blur. He was making good time. Though it was to be expected, he knew this area like the back of his hand by now. Jumping over a merchant's cart, the unknown figure used the top of the wooden structure to propel himself onto a nearby balcony, springboarding off of it and launching himself onto the roof of the adjacent building. Yes, he was so close now. He mentally counted down in his head. 10, 9, 8 foot. He jumped from the building and landed heavily onto the road below, rolling to cushion his fall as he continued his mad sprint across the village. 7, 6, 5. He ran like the devil was on his tail. Pushing more of the mystical blue energy into his legs, the figure picked up more speed as he neared his next checkpoint. 4, 3, 2. Yes. He mentally cheered as he passed his checkpoint with time to spare. He quickly rounded the corner of the street, narrowly avoiding a bystander carrying groceries as his eyes landed on his finish line almost there. Hey, watch where you're going, asshole. Sorry, shouted the blonde blur over his shoulder. He couldn't afford to stop and apologize when he was doing so well. He jumped onto the side of another nearby building, traveling onto progressively higher constructs. And with one final push, he jumped as far as he could, tucking his shoulder forward for protection as his small frame slammed into the highest window of the Hokage Tower. Crash. Yes. What the? The Sandaime quietly observed the blonde youth that had just barreled through his window and surprised his guests behind intertwined fingers. With a light groan, Naruto picked himself up and rubbed the back of his head. Naruto. What's the meaning of this? The Uzumaki grinned broadly and placed his hands on his hips. The meaning of this, old man, is that I just beat my best time. He finally turned around to face the Hokage. And I'd beat my last score by an entire 20. He trailed off as he noticed an extra person inside the office who was giving him a strange look. Sarutobi pinched the bridge of his nose in exasperation. I am in a meeting, you impetuous child. Naruto faced the Hokage and scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Hee hee, my bad. Hiruzen groaned and turned back towards his guest. Yurimono-san, a Chunin guard outside will escort you to the market district. You will be able to replenish your stocks there. All right. Thank you, Hokage-sama. The merchant sent one last look towards Naruto's direction before taking his leave. The third Hokage gave a weary sigh as he turned his attention towards the nervous-looking Jinchuriki. Naruto. How many times have I told you to not barge in like that? Sorry, old man. I mean, really. What if I was in an important meeting? How would I look in front of the daimyo or an allied leader if they saw that I can't even keep my own citizen in check? I said I'm sorry. For goodness sake. It's like it's in your genes to give this poor man a hard time. Naruto looked at the Hokage strangely. But I'm not wearing any jeans. HNGH. The Hokage shook his head in exasperation. He really needed to curb his vocabulary when he talked to Naruto. Sometimes he forgot he was only 6. Hey, old man, Hold that thought. The monkey summoner reached for a package that was on his desk and gave it a quick glance over. Making sure that everything was in order, he nodded and gestured the blonde child over. I apologize for giving you your gift so late, but I had pressing matters to attend to. Happy birthday, Naruto. The young Jinchuriki looked at the package in surprise. Thanks, old man. He still wasn't used to receiving presents. Nevertheless, he smiled bashfully and quickly opened it. The old Hokage smiled as Naruto freed the jacket from within its plastic confines. Well, my boy, what do you think? I remember you telling me that orange was your favorite color. Naruto stared at the orange monstrosity that was being held in his hands with mouth agape and poorly veiled shock. Old man, orange was his favorite color, but wasn't this a bit too much? Sarutobi smiled, oblivious to the boy's horror. Well? Do you like it? Try it on. Why, yeah, I love it, thank you. Smiling nervously, the young Uzumaki folded the jacket and tucked it under his arm. I'll try it on a bit later if that's okay with you. I actually had something I wanted to ask. The Hokage nodded and leaned back into his chair. Ah, that's right. Well then, what can I help you with? Well, the whiskered boy fumbled nervously. I was wondering if you knew a ninja called Kakashi? It was hard not to notice the immediate tension that settled in the room once those words had left his mouth. All of a sudden, it felt like the temperature had dropped several degrees. A slight frown marred the Hokage's face. Hiruzen carefully observed the face of the Uzumaki in front of him. I do know the man that you are talking about. What is your issue with him? No issue. I'd just like to find him, that's all. I read he was the student of the 4th, so I kinda wanna see what he's like, you know? So, you would like to know about his whereabouts then? The blonde nodded vigorously. Yeah, that's right. The Hokage narrowed his eyes slightly. You're not hiding anything from me, are you? Naruto gulped nervously and quickly shook his head. No, sir. Sarutobi stayed silent for a few more minutes. Technically, Kakashi wasn't prohibited to interact with the boy outside of his ANBU hours. But still, part of him couldn't help but feel apprehensive about it. Kakashi is a very busy person, Naruto, one of our best. He is on a mission right now at the Fire Temple and shall return tomorrow. When he has not been assigned a mission, however, he can usually be found either at the Memorial Stone or resting at his home, which is opposite to Kinta-san's literature shop. The third hummed thoughtfully. Although, he began. I have a feeling that if you're looking for him, then he probably already knows it. Naruto nodded gratefully, and tried his best to ignore that last part. Man, that sounded creepy. Alright, thanks old man. I'll try this jacket on at home, alright? See ya. He quickly placed his foot on the windowsill and launched himself out. Sarutobi sighed, his gaze remaining on the outside world. What are you going to reveal to him, Kakashi? There were no actual laws prohibiting people to tell Naruto about his heritage, but it was still a consensus among those who knew that he was just not ready for that kind of knowledge yet. The Hokage's thoughtful stare morphed into one of slight annoyance as he looked over at a seemingly random corner of his office. I don't know whether it's a good or bad thing that my ANBU don't even react to Naruto's sudden entrances anymore. He received no answer, but the light noise of fabric shuffling nervously told him more than enough. Naruto stuffed his hands inside the pockets of his black shorts in annoyance as he walked along the streets of Konoha. Man, this Kakashi guy isn't even here right now, this sucks. He groaned and casually placed his hands behind his head as he stared at the sky in boredom. What to do, his half-lidded gaze turned towards the sound of a shop's rolling metal gate being lifted up. He recognized that place. The man owning the shop had overcharged him for a pack of lollies once. A grin slowly crept onto his face. Oh, he knew what he would do. You damned hoodlum, you're gonna pay for this. The running form of Naruto grinned and looked over his shoulder, using his index finger to mockingly pull down onto his bottom eyelid. Catch me if you can, loser! The shopkeeper growled and looked at the street his shop resided in. He, along with several of his neighbors, have had faces and insults drawn on their walls in bright red paint, courtesy of their resident Jinchuriki. Was it him again? A villager complained in annoyance. Yeah, the boy whose name is Taboo. He's made a big mess, sighed the owner of an artisanal shop. The villager standing next to him nodded and glared at the boy in the distance. Even if we want to file a complaint, he doesn't have any parents that we can complain to. The Uzumaki's grin slowly faded into a half-hearted smile. He couldn't let these people see how hurtful those words were. Their opinion on him wouldn't change anyway. What a nuisance. He's so unpleasant. I'll say. He's such a pain. Yet despite that, he couldn't help the sad frown that managed to worm its way onto his face. Shikamaru! Quit lazing around. Troublesome. He didn't know why, but he somehow found himself near the playground next door to the Shinobi Academy. He knew that he shouldn't come here, it was bad for his mental health. Every time he did, he'd leave feeling sad and dejected. And he had a feeling today would be no different. Leave Shika alone, Ino. Chided a plump boy with red swirls on his cheeks. Ino merely humphed and crossed her arms. Naruto watched as children his age and over played within the playground. There was a boy with a spiky ponytail lazily lying down and staring up at the evening sun. Next to him was a small bossy-looking girl with platinum hair and aquamarine eyes. Looking further into the playground, he could see a kid with wild brown hair and red upside-down triangles on his cheeks chasing after a tiny white puppy. 2 other girls were playing on a seesaw. A kid yelled in excitement as he chased after his friends in their game of tag. Maybe today would be different. Maybe he could walk in and ask to play, and they would smile and invite him into their games. I'm sorry, Mommy says I shouldn't play with you. Heh. Naruto closed his eyes and made his way out of the play area. As if that would ever happen. By the time he got to his apartment, it was already night time. Stuffing his hand in his pocket, he fished around in it and pulled out the key to his door. Sighing, he inserted the key in and turned the lock, opening the door and stepping inside. I'm home, he muttered to himself. His words seemed to echo in the empty apartment, the silence bringing his mood down even more. The Jinchuriki got started on his dinner as hot tears trailed down his face. What am I doing back here? Naruto stared at the giant metal bars of the 9 tails in confusion. Why was he here? He hadn't been looking for the warm feeling earlier. Today had sucked. Not only were his plans to get his long-desired answers rescheduled, his overall mood had been even worse than usual. He didn't know why, but the sting of loneliness had hit him extra hard that time, and the bad thoughts were starting to make their way in once again. After coming home and heating himself some ramen, the blonde boy had immediately gone to bed, hoping to sleep through the rest of the evening. He'd only been in bed for a few minutes before he felt himself getting pulled within his consciousness. The Nine Tails observed him with contempt. The cage itself seemed to not be as dark as it was before, so the fox was easily distinguishable from within. His massive head rested on his folded paws, or were those hands? His 9 long tails twitching here and there in idle annoyance. Why have you returned here, human? The fox snarled out irritably. Naruto looked up at him in slight apprehension and shrugged helplessly. There was none of that suffocating pressure this time. He wondered why that was. I'm as confused as you are. Kyubi growled out in annoyance. As if being stuck in this human's body wasn't enough, he now had to endure him coming in and out of the seal all the damn time. The fox decided to just close his eyes and ignore the blonde boy for now. Now what? The Uzumaki thought in slight consternation. Every time he'd been here in the past, the fox had ended up forcibly kicking him out. He sure as hell didn't know how to get out on his own. So, after a few moments of hesitation, the young boy slowly sat down onto the wet floor of his mind and watched the Nine Tails closely. He'd never actually looked at the fox before. Sure, he'd seen him in the past and in drawings, but those times, he was either too terrified or didn't care enough to pay close attention. Looking at him now, he didn't seem all that bad if you ignored the fact that he was the size of a small mountain, or the fact that he had 9 giant tails, or the fact that his hands looked freakishly human-like. But looking at him now, almost looking like he was sleeping, his eyes closed and head resting on his paws in such an animal-like fashion, his giant ear flicking every now and then, his tails moving about randomly. Why was he so afraid of that giant ball of fur again? So, began Naruto as he swallowed thickly. Mr. Nine Tails. A sudden, familiar wave of pressure made him stop mid-sentence. Ah. That was why. Kyubi snapped a single eye open and glared at the much smaller human. Do not call me that. He rumbled angrily. Naruto nodded his head quickly and brought his hands up in a placating manner. Okay. The fox glared at him for a few more seconds before he closed his eyes once more, the pressure disappearing along with the action. The blonde Jinchuriki took in some much-needed air as he wiped his now sweaty forehead with the back of his sleeve. Looking up at the Kyubi once more, he continued. Kyubi, said Bijou, cracked a single eye open. Can I ask you a question? Kyubi remained silent as he continued to glare at the boy. Well, that wasn't a no. I was wondering, why did you attack Konoha? The mighty demon fox lifted his head as a smirk pulled its way onto his lips. You think I need a reason to attack your pathetic little village? Naruto quickly shook his head. No, it's just the whiskered boy frowned in thought. I'm just trying to understand. The last time I was here, you called us humans ants. The fox looked at the boy from the corner of his eye. And I don't know if it's the same with Bijou's, he continued, but when we humans run into ants, or a colony of ants, we usually just ignore them, you know? Because they're so small and weak, there's no point in killing them. But it's when the ants act aggressive and sting us that we start fighting back. So. The Nine Tails narrowed his eye. What is your point, human? The blonde frowned slightly at the fox. I don't know, it just feels like there's more to this whole thing. It's hard to think that you'd go out of your way to attack our village for no reason. His expression soured slightly. Plus, it feels like nothing I've been told so far is the truth anymore. Everything is just lies after lies. Kyubi regarded his warden with a critical eye. None of his previous containers had ever asked him anything like that before. TCH, humans and their emotions. If I tell you, will you cease your pathetic attempts to understand me? Yes. No. He wanted to learn more about this. He had a feeling that this was his only chance to learn about something that very few knew of. The great beast heaved another annoyed sigh, his breath ruffling the clothes and hair of the small boy and nearly making him fall over. Stupid fox. I was taken out of my previous container, the Bijou said gruffly. Some man used that accursed Uchiha to place me under a spell and force me to attack your village for him. Wait, I'm not your first container. The boy interrupted. The giant fox glared down at him, making Naruto scratch the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry. Kyubi huffed aggressively. To answer your question, no, you are not my first container. A look of anger appeared on the fox's face, his lips pulling into another snarl. I've had 3 containers in total. And I've been passed down, from one container to another like some type of family heirloom. The great beast looked absolutely offended as he glared towards the boy again. Do you know what that's like, warden? I've been in prison for nearly 60 years, used as a glorified power source from my containers without so much as a kind word. I am tired, human. No wonder this big guy was so angry. 60 years was a long time. Is that why you killed my parents? Naruto asked softly. Because you wanted your freedom? The Nine Tails closed his eyes and placed his head on his paws once more. Leave me be now, human. I've answered your questions. Naruto looked around hesitantly. Sure. I don't know how to leave, he finished lamely. That earned him another glare. Okay, so the old man said that Kakashi should be either at the memorial stone or at his house. God, I hope he's at his house. The memorial stone was on the other damn side of Konoha. So here he was, making his way to where he remembered seeing Kinta's bookshop at 8 a.m. And after 10 more minutes of walking, he'd finally arrived. Man, I should have asked old man Hokage what he looks like, he mentally berated himself. Opposite to Kinta's shop. He looked over at the little shop with the faded green painting and turned his head around to the house directly in front of it. Is this it? The house itself looked barely big enough to fit one person. The guy clearly didn't care about living luxuriously. Leaning against the house was a man with familiar lopsided silver hair, though he couldn't quite remember where he'd seen it before, and the laziest eye he'd ever seen on anyone. In his hand was a book with a green cover and an illustration of what looked like a guy chasing a girl. The shinobi had a dark blue face mask hiding half of his features and a headband that slanted down and covered his left eye, giving him an even more mysterious feel. Slowly making his way towards the man, the Uzumaki stopped a few paces beside him and stared at his face, or what he could see of it at least. The masked man looked away from his book to glance at the blonde boy with a lazy eye. Need something, kid? Naruto blinked. Are you Kakashi? He asked hesitantly. Kakashi turned his attention back towards his book. The one and only. Why are you leaning against your own house? The masked man shrugged. I just felt like leaning here. The whiskered boy looked at him strangely. That's kinda weird. Kakashi stayed silent and kept reading his book. Seeing he wouldn't get an answer, he pressed on. Is it true you were trained by the fourth? The ANBU commander looked over at the blonde from the corner of his eye. That is true. At that, Naruto began to fidget nervously. Do you mind if I ask you a few questions? Kakashi flipped a page of his book. Depends on the questions. He looked over to the smaller boy and saw the angry pout forming on his lips. The gray-haired teenager chuckled and snapped his book closed, pocketing it in his pouch. I'm only kidding. What did you want to ask me? The young boy looked up at the ANBU commander as the taller of the two crouched down to be at his eye level. He tried his best to come up with a believable question that wouldn't make him get caught. He had to be discreet about this. Well, I wanted to know if you knew why he would do certain things? The Jonin quirked an eyebrow. What do you mean by certain things? Well, let's say you're at a birthday party, the blonde began. And someone had to cut the cake. Would the fourth choose a random person to cut it? Or would he pick the person that would cut the best? Kakashi held his chin thoughtfully. Lord Fourth was a pretty smart and analytic person. I believe he would know the individual skills of everyone at the party and pick the person best suited for the job. Naruto frowned at that. I see, so the fourth knew about everyone beforehand and would pick the best person for the task? That just raised even more questions. What was his connection to the Yondaime? Why would he be chosen of all people? Kakashi observed the small blonde. He had to resist the urge of ruffling his hair at the sight of his little brother figure with his head cocked to the side in deep thought. He really was a cute kid. So the gray-haired man began slowly. How long have you known about the Ninetales? The Uzumaki's head snapped towards Kakashi so fast that he almost gave himself whiplash. So much for discretion. How? Did I know? Kakashi finished for him. It was a clever disguise, but given your status, it's pretty easy to make the connection. Seeing the panic quickly growing on the little boy's face, he added, Don't worry, I won't tell Lord Third if that's what you're worried about. Naruto looked startled at that. You're not? The Jonin's eye curved up into a smile. Nope. He didn't believe that for 1 second. His life up until now had only been a series of lies. 4 months. He muttered after a few seconds of hesitation. I've known about it for 4 months. He admitted. Kakashi hummed. I see. So then, why did the fourth choose me? It's hard to believe that there wouldn't be better options, you know? The masked man considered that question. He had to be careful with what he revealed. He did want to tell the boy everything one day, but he wasn't ready just yet. Minato-sensei saw something in you that night. He believed that you would be able to handle the Kyuubi's power better than anyone. But why? Naruto still didn't know why, and no one would give him a straight answer. But he had a feeling that he wouldn't get one today. What about my parents then? The blonde asked softly as he looked down in sadness. Did they just let him seal it into me? What kind of parent does that? Did they even care about me at all? He was startled though when he felt a hand land on top of his head and ruffle his golden locks. Your parents loved you more than anything else in this world. And there it was. Just as he'd feared, he had said too much. But he'd be damned if he let the boy think that his parents hadn't cared for him. In all his years as a shinobi, Kakashi had never seen Minato and Kushina more excited about anything else than taking care of this child. Naruto looked up at him in surprise. His parents loved him? Like really, really loved him? That thought was surreal, but it made him really happy. He didn't think that anyone would care about him this much. A tight, unfamiliar feeling bloomed in his chest as he tried his best to fight away the tears that threatened to pool in the corner of his eyes. You knew my parents? At the ANBU's nod, the Uzumaki quickly added. Can you tell me who they were? Nope. What? Why not? You're not ready, the copy ninja said simply. I'll tell you when you're a bit older, but not now. Naruto looked dejected at that, but quickly lightened up at the prospect of learning about them later on. At least that was better than nothing. You promise? Kakashi gave him another eye smile. I promise. The Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails gave the masked man a weak smile as he began to nervously play with his fingers. Can you tell me a bit about them at least? Kakashi chuckled lightly and sat down next to the blonde. Sure, I can do that. Turns out he'd inherited his brash and loud personality from his mom as well as his ramen addiction. Kakashi had said that when he had met her for the first time, she had been eating bowl after bowl of the noodly goodness at a ramen stand. He didn't know why, but that had made him really happy. Somehow with that knowledge, he now felt more connected to his late mother. Apparently, he looked a lot like his father, almost scarily so. He was told that he'd be a carbon copy of him had he longer hair and no whiskers. Maybe that was why he would sometimes catch the old man Hokage staring at him as if he was seeing a ghost? Hey, Kakashi? You're strong, right? The ANBU commander hummed. I get by. Naruto nodded his head slowly. Do you think you could train me? Kakashi looked up at the sky and thought. You're a prankster, right? He looked back over to said prankster who was now giving him a curious look. Prank someone for me and I might consider it. All right, the blonde said after a moment's pause. Who do you want me to prank? Mato Guy, replied Kakashi. The Uzumaki looked down in contemplation as he mulled the name over in his mind. How do you want me to prank him? After a few seconds with no replies, Naruto looked up at where the ANBU commander was. Kakashi? Only he wasn't there anymore. When had he even left? Oh, come on. Mato Guy, A-rank jonin of Konohagakure, also known as the Green Beast of Konoha. Born on the 1st of January, master of hand-to-hand combat, weighs 76 kilograms and stands at a height of 184 centimeters. Completed over 700 missions, recently took a protege under his wing. Preferred food, extra spicy curry. His pastimes included training and nothing else. It was crazy the amount of information one could learn in the Konoha archives. What would be the best way to prank this guy? Pranking was a form of art. You couldn't just find a random person and just use any old run-of-the-mill prank. You had to hit them where it hurt, find out information about them, know what makes them tick and use that against them to add insult to injury. Like a whoopee cushion on old man Hokage's chair. No one would expect someone so important to sit down and let out a loud one. As things stood, there wasn't much he could use against this guy. He didn't really dislike anything and all he did was train and train and train. There wasn't much he could work with in his love for taijutsu. He himself was about as scary as a wet kitten, so that only left out his love for spicy food. I could make him something super spicy. No, that's too much. I don't want to actually harm him. What about? An idea began to form in his head. Yeah, that would work. So here he was, 15 minutes later near the gates of Konoha waiting for the sublime green beast of Konoha. In his hands was a plate of what appeared to be freshly made spicy rice curry. I read that he starts his laps near the front gates, so maybe I can find him there. And true to his words, there he was. Doing some sort of over-the-top stretching and screaming something about youth was a person wearing green spandex, a bowl cut, and the thickest goddamn eyebrows he'd ever seen. Were those things alive? Grinning to himself, he quickly made his way over to the man with the thick eyebrows. Guy-san. Stopping his stretching, Guy turned towards the voice that called out to him and flashed a blindingly bright smile. What can I help you with, my youthful friend? Man, this guy is loud. I was told that you like super spicy curry, so a friend of yours wanted me to give you this. He held out his hands and presented the plate he was holding. What? A kind soul made spicy curry just for me, the green man bellowed. Tears began to form in his eyes as he took the plate of curry in his hands. Thank you, my young friend. Such a youthful act cannot go unrewarded. I must find this person and thank them properly. Actually, Naruto interrupted quickly. They said they preferred to remain anonymous. Guy flashed another boisterous grin that seemed to reflect the light of 1,000 suns. So a mystery fan then. Well, no matter. I will eventually find them, and if I cannot do that, then I shall run 100 laps around Konoha on my hands. And if I cannot do that, then I will. Please, Guy-san, the curry is getting cold. interrupted the blonde through gritted teeth as he held out a spoon to the man. Seriously, what was up with this guy? A look of horror appeared on the loud man's face. Oh no, I must not let such youthful behavior go to waste. I shall devour this entire plate as if it was the last meal I'd ever receive. Guy took the spoon, scooped up a heaping serving and brought it to his mouth. Thank you for the meal. Naruto waited with bated breath. Guy's hand began to tremble. Did it work? What is this? The Jonin specialist dropped the plate, making it shatter onto the ground. He backed away a few steps, bringing a hand up to cover his mouth in horror as he pointed an accusatory finger at the food on the ground. This isn't extra spicy rice curry. This is just mildly spicy curry. Yes. Guy turned around in horror and pulled onto his hair. How could I have fallen for such an unyouthful trick? It seems that my flames of youth have been diminishing during these peaceful times. I must work extra hard to fan those flames back to life once again. And if I cannot do that, then I shall run all the way to Suna on my hands with a boulder attached to my legs. And with that, the Jonin was gone within the blink of an eye, leaving only a trail of dust in his wake. The blonde pumped his fist victoriously. That had totally worked. He had a feeling that a guy like that would have had an over-the-top reaction. And if the two laughing Chunin over at the booth near the entrance were any indication, then it was a pretty successful prank. Looks like you got him good. Wah! Naruto spun around in surprise and came face to face with the torso of a green vest. Jumping back a few meters, he gave the ANBU commander an irritated stare. How do you keep doing that? Kakashi tilted his head innocently. Keep doing what? Naruto shook his head. Never mind, did you see that? I got him. That you did. So, does this mean that you'll train me now? Asked the blonde in excitement. Kakashi hummed thoughtfully. Nope. The excited grin immediately fell off the boy's face as an indignant look replaced it. What? Why not? I told you I'd think about it, and I thought about it. The answer is no. Seeing the dejected look on the Jinchuriki's face, the Jonin elaborated. I'm an ANBU commander. Commander of the primary squadron, to be precise. Kakashi explained. I wouldn't have the time to train you. Naruto's gaze fell. Oh. Well, he supposed it was too good to be true. Still, it wasn't like this was a complete fruitless venture. He did get to learn more about his parents. Kakashi placed his hand on top of the kid's head and ruffled his blonde hair. Ma, don't look so down. I can't train you, but I can still give you a crash course. The Uzumaki looked back up at the taller man with hope making its way back onto his face. Really? The copy ninja eye smiled at the smaller boy. Yep. Are you free now? Yes, sir. Good answer, you passed the second test. A good ninja always jumps at the opportunity to learn new skills and to improve oneself, no matter the situation. Now follow me. Naruto quickly ran after the Jonin as he attempted to keep pace with him with his shorter legs. What do you mean second test? There was a first test, he asked as he looked up at the gray-haired man. Information gathering on the target, which you passed. Oh, replied the blonde. Well, that was interesting. Naruto looked around in wonder at the grassy field that made up Training Ground 7. He'd seen it before, while he was spying on ninja to pick up whatever skills he could. Not that he got much out of it, he could never remember those weird hand signs they kept making dash, but he'd never actually been inside of it. It was quite pretty. The midday sun highlighted the different shades of greens and flowers in a beautiful way. He looked back at the man that was accompanying him, who for his part, was just standing there, silent and unmoving. So, what are you gonna teach me first? How to spit fire? How to summon lightning? He asked in excitement. Are you gonna teach me some awesome cool fighting moves? The blonde did some ridiculous fighting poses that his young mind considered to be cool. Kakashi watched the blonde closely. What do you know right now? Oh, Naruto paused halfway through a poorly executed back kick and looked down thoughtfully. Well, there was some kind of clone jutsu that I copied from someone a while back, but I can't do it that well. Other than that, nothing. The copy ninja observed the younger blonde. He was only 6, so he wasn't expecting much else. But the life of a Jinchuriki was an unforgiving one. There was a reason why the name meant power of human sacrifice. During times of war, they were a village's greatest weapon save for the Kage and could completely turn the tide of a fight. What better way to strike fear into the heart of your enemies than by sicking an angry, seething mass of destruction onto them? But even during these peaceful times, Jinchurikis were ostracized and still treated as weapons, being trained every day to keep their skills sharp, undergoing mental conditioning to bear the weight of a tailed beast's power, learning to control and harness it. They were the epitome of killing machines. They were monsters that had to be the strongest. And if war ever broke out again, Naruto would have to fight those monsters. The blonde had to be ready. From the start, he was given an unfair hand. And while that sucked, there was nothing he could do now but fight and survive. And he would make sure that Naruto survived. He would take his own life sooner than he'd let him die in a ditch, killed like a dog by some random shinobi. He would not hold his hand, he would not coddle him or baby him, or make him believe that everything could be resolved with peaceful talk and cups of tea. The life of a shinobi was a grisly one. In a world where they raised child soldiers and murdered each other on a day-to-day basis, he had to make sure that he would be ready. As much as it pained him, he couldn't afford to waste any more time. He couldn't let the boy have the childhood that he wished he could have. He couldn't do something like that, he didn't have it in him. But perhaps someone else could. Someone who could do what needed to be done. Reaching down to his belt, he grabbed hold of his mask and brought it up to his face, clipping it into place. Dog looked over towards the small blonde, who was looking back at him curiously. So you've been silent for a while. The boy looked off to the side. Are you? A sandal brutally burying itself into his stomach cut the Uzumaki off. The boy cried out in pain as he was violently sent flying away, the back of his head slamming into a tree being the only thing to stop his momentum. Where was your mistake? Naruto painfully opened one eye as he struggled to catch his breath. God, everything hurt. His head was ringing, it hurt to breath, it hurt to not breath, it felt like a part of his stomach had been caved in. Looking up at the monotone sound of the older male's voice, he had to wonder what had just happened. It was still Kakashi standing in front of him, yet it didn't feel like Kakashi. Everything was still there, the hair, the clothes, the blue face mask that he could kind of see around the edges of the dog mask. All was the same besides that mask. The person standing in front of him felt completely different. While Kakashi stood with a slight slouch and a lazy feel, this man was standing rigid and at the ready, a cold and terrifying aura surrounding his body. What the heck had just happened? My mistake? He struggled to get out. You took your eyes off the enemy. But you're not my enemy, wheezed out the blonde. Dog said nothing in reply and slowly stalked his way forward. What was this? Was this the crash course he was talking about? He didn't like the idea of training all that much anymore, he felt scared. That pressure surrounding the man was so familiar yet unfamiliar. Get up, the NBU commander said coldly. Naruto panted harshly. I don't think I can. You said you wanted to be strong, right? Dog snarled. Stronger than anyone. How did he know that? He'd only said that to himself while he was at home. Then, get up. Dog disappeared from his view, and it was only his instincts screaming at him to move away that saved him from a deadly stomp that cracked the earth beneath. Frantically standing back up, he crossed his arms protectively in front of his chest as a powerful kick connected with his forearms, fracturing his bones and sending him flying once more. Naruto's head was swimming. His arms hung limply at his sides as he felt pain everywhere unlike anything he's ever felt before. His chest felt numb, his breathing ragged as tears of pain stung the corners of his eyes. He weakly lifted his head to look at the approaching ANBU with tired eyes. No, he couldn't fight it anymore. His eyes closed slowly as his brain finally granted him blissful darkness. Dog stopped in his tracks as he watched the boy's head droop into unconsciousness. With a sigh, he brought a hand up to his mask and pulled it off his face, returning it to his belt. Perhaps he'd been a little harsh, but it was necessary. After all, one didn't repeat the same mistakes again when pain was a penalty. Kakashi sat down next to the blonde and rummaged through his pouch for medical supplies. Not that it even matters, he thought. The QB will probably take care of those by the time I'm done applying them. Naruto slowly blinked, his eyes opened. God, what had happened to him? He felt like he just got ran over by one of those big trains he'd heard about from the land of snow. Memories soon came back to him. That's right, he received a total beatdown by Kakashi. What the hell was all that about? Wincing at his throbbing head, he placed a hand against his temple to try to ease the pain and looked up, finding the masked man sitting a few paces away from him, legs crossed and facing away from him towards the direction of the village. Welcome back, he said plainly. Naruto quickly crawled back, making sure he was a safe distance away. He didn't know if that guy was going to start beating the hell out of him again, so he had to be careful. But looking at him now, his demeanor seemed to have gone back to his normal self, if not a little more subdued. He glanced down at the object hanging from his belt. Was it that mask? Kakashi's personality had changed as soon as he had put it on, and now, he was back to normal once more. I know you're afraid of me right now. Naruto looked up at the back of the shinobi, who still hadn't turned around to face him. But please trust me when I tell you that this is the quickest way. The blonde boy brought his knees up to his chest and wrapped his arms around them for comfort. The quickest way? What did he mean by that? I know you did your research, Kakashi continued. You know what being a Jinchuriki entails. Naruto looked down at that. I want you to be ready, the copy ninja said. I want you to be able to take care of yourself, which is why I'm being so harsh on you right now. It's only against the worst odds possible that a shinobi truly shines. This is how you become strong. You fight, you survive, you adapt. And the next time, you won't be the one that will be trying to survive. Kakashi slowly stood up and dusted his pants. Naruto looked up once more at the taller male before his gaze drifted back to his belt, eyeing the mask hanging from it. That mask, what is it? The ANBU commander looked back at the boy. That mask is my duty. That mask is what lets me do what needs to be done. When there is something that Kakashi, Jonin of the Hidden Leaf, can't do, then I put on this mask and let Dog take over. Dog? Are you kidding me? Naruto frowned up at the man. It's just a mask. Nothing changes when you put this on, it's still you. It's much more than just a mask. Kakashi reached behind into his pouch and pulled out his green book from earlier. It's what keeps me sane. It lets me be able to look my friends in the eyes and be able to genuinely smile with them. The blonde stared up at the Jonin in disbelief, who only chuckled in return. I don't expect you to understand right now. But maybe you will one day. For now, though, Kakashi reached into his pouch once more and pulled a rolled-up scroll out from within. I want you to get stronger. I can't train you, but I can point you in the right direction. He tossed the scroll over to Naruto, who only managed to raise his hands up to catch it before it whacked him on the head. I will find you again in 1 year. Until then, train your body. Train until you sweat and bleed. Train until your muscles are begging you to stop. Train until you can't anymore. And in 1 year, we will meet once more. And with that, the mysterious shinobi was gone. Looking down at the scroll in his hands, Naruto unfurled it and saw that it contained a list of training exercises. Running, air punches, air kicks, rock throws. He wants me to do the exercises on this list for a whole year? The blonde wasn't too sure, but that seemed like the most logical explanation. His eyes went back towards where the masked ninja had been before. Was this really the path he wanted to take? This felt like a turning point, where whichever decision he took would change his life forever. Naruto glanced back down at the scroll in his hands. He promised to himself that he would be stronger, and now he'll promise to himself that next time, he'll put up a better fight. His grip around the scroll tightened as determination shone within his eyes. He had work to do. 95, 96, 97, 98, 99, 100. Ah! A young boy exclaimed as he fell onto his back in exhaustion. Man, those high kicks were tough. Taking in loud gulps of air, half-lidded blue eyes stared up at the midday sky. It had been 6 months since his crash course with Kakashi. 6 months since his training had begun. 6 months since he'd started pushing himself harder and harder every day. His new training regimen took some getting used to, but he eventually managed to find a good rhythm. Using the tips and advices in the scroll that the ANBU commander had left him with, Naruto had sorted every exercise into a weekly routine. Every Monday morning, he'd wake up at 7 a.m. and run a few laps around Training Ground 7. Once he was sufficiently warmed up, he would then proceed to practice his kicks and punches on a wooden post by doing 100 punches on each arm and 100 high kicks on each leg. After that was rock throw practice. Because he was too young to be handling sharp objects, he was stuck with practicing with decent-sized rocks roughly the size of a golf ball. He'd draw a target on a nearby tree and tried his best to throw the rock as close to possible to the middle point. After each successful attempt, he'd go back a foot, doing so until he couldn't hit the center anymore. Tuesdays were his physical building training. First he would run a full lap around Konoha. Man, that part sucked. Konoha was big as hell, and once he was done and his blood was pumping, he would proceed to do 50 sit-ups, 50 push-ups, 50 squats, and 50 pull-ups. Thursdays were his chakra control practice days. At around 9 a.m., he would come to Training Ground 7 to meditate for an hour. The scroll that Kakashi had given him contained a few helpful tips in doing so. The idea of the exercise was to look within himself and get a better feel and understanding on the way that his chakra felt and worked, to visualize the amount that was contained within his body, know his limits, and be able to differentiate which parts of his chakra were good and which ones were bad. Thursdays and Fridays were similar to Mondays and Tuesdays respectively. His weekends were used as rest days, where he'd allow his body to heal and grow stronger. Strangely enough, he'd never gotten any sore muscles the following day, always feeling as fresh as a daisy when he woke up. Weird. Instead, the scroll had instructed him to spend his Saturdays at a library and read everything he could about history and anatomy, making his sparse vocabulary a bit more distinguished. Much to his consternation, more than 60% of his ramen stock had been thrown out, and his fridge that was once mostly empty all the time was now full of different types of fruits and vegetables, with his little freezer containing frozen meats. Naruto could not believe the audacity of these ANBU. First they broke into his apartment, and now they took his ramen and replaced it with vegetables. Just what was the world coming to, where a man couldn't enjoy the small things in life anymore? And if that infuriating Heno Heno Mahiji scribbled into the wall of his kitchen was any indication, then he knew exactly who the culprit was. Oh, he was so gonna make him pay in 6 months' time. Even though the exercises were, in the small boy's opinion, boring and totally not ninja-like, he'd taken solace in the fact that he did notice some differences. He could now complete his sets in the afternoon without stopping halfway, and he could run faster and for a longer period of time. His kicks felt stronger, his punches faster, his chakra calmer and less erratic than it used to be. Even though he was doing great progress, he couldn't help but hope that next year would bring more exciting training. Opening his eyes, the blond boy heaved a small sigh as he pushed himself back onto his feet. Alright, next up is rock throws. My best score so far is 13 meters, so all I have to do is dash. Crunch! Naruto spun around in surprise and looked upon the bewildered face of a boy around his age with dark hair that spiked up at the back of his head. God, his sixth sense really was getting rusty now that he wasn't living on the street anymore. It wasn't his fault, no one usually came to this training ground. What are you doing? Asked the boy with black hair. Naruto looked at him uneasily. Training, he replied cautiously. What are you doing? The other kid's thoughtful frown morphed into an excited smile. I'm hiding from my brother. He ran to one of the many trees that were within Training Ground 7 and placed his hands on the bark, looking up high into the canopy. He's off duty today, so he agreed to play hide and seek with me. The blond boy remained silent as he watched the unknown newcomer start climbing the length of the trunk. Once he reached the first set of branches, he looked back down at Naruto and placed his index finger in front of his lips in a shushing motion. Sure, don't tell him you saw me. Sure, Naruto slowly turned back towards the pile of rock he was about to use for his target practice. The other kid wasn't doing anything wrong, and he seemed friendly enough. He just wasn't used to training while someone else was there. It messed with his concentration. Let's just get this over with. He picked up a few rocks and walked 10 meters away from the target carved onto the tree. Placing down the rocks at his feet, but keeping one in his hand, he took his throwing stance and glared at his mark. With a small grunt, he threw the rock and watched it sail through the air, impacting the tree bark with a dull thunk. So close. He was within the target, but he was still a few centimeters off the middle. He threw a couple more. 2 of them were a bit closer while one was a bit further than the rest. He let out a frustrated sigh. None of them had hit the center yet. He got into his throwing stance once more and pulled his arm back, getting ready to throw the rock again. Your arm isn't straight enough. Naruto spun around in surprise for the second time that day, his hand that had been drawn back continuing the throwing motion despite his sudden shift in movement. The blonde watched on helplessly as the rock flew towards the newcomer, though his fears were for naught as said newcomer didn't even flinch, his hand effortlessly shooting up to catch the rock. The new person looked like an older version of the kid from earlier, though his hair was longer and tied into a small ponytail. Line marks adorned his face starting from under his eyes and reaching past his nose. Naruto took a cautious step back, being instantly unnerved by the guy in front of him. Earlier, he hadn't expected anyone to enter the training ground, so it was understandable that someone had managed to sneak up on him. But this time, his guard had been fully up, and the newcomer had still managed to get past his senses. Who are you? He silently cursed himself for the slight tremor in his voice. The man just smiled back pleasantly at him. Itachi, he replied simply. He gestured towards the target with a nod of his head and repeated, Your arm isn't straight enough, it's flailing around too much, and your overall stance is too rigid. You need to relax a little. Naruto stared at the man in uncertainty. When Itachi saw that the boy wasn't about to move, he walked closer until he was a few meters away from him, and crossed his arms. Go on, try again. The Uzumaki gulped slightly, and slowly turned back around. Well, it's not like he had anything to lose. Getting back into his stance, he relaxed his body slightly, and held his arms straighter. He pulled his hand back, getting ready to throw but was interrupted once more. Wait. Huh. He looked back towards Itachi. Your leg. The man said, bend it forward a bit more. Naruto did so and looked back towards him for confirmation. Seeing him nod, he stared ahead at the target once more and threw the rock at it, making sure to keep his arms straight. Thunk. Well, it didn't hit dead center, but it was still much closer than his previous attempts. The blonde allowed himself a small smile as he turned back around to face the older man. Thanks, some Itachi. The Uchiha elder just nodded and walked towards the tree that the younger boy from earlier had climbed up. Sasuke, he called out looking up into the canopy. Come on down and introduce yourself. All was silent for a few seconds before a branch on the tree rustled and out popped the head of the younger boy, whose face now sported a small pout. Man, how did you know I was here? Itachi didn't reply as he turned back towards Naruto while Sasuke slowly made his way back down the tree. What's your name? He asked, feigning ignorance. Everyone in Anbu knew who the blond boy was. He had become something of a fan favorite amongst the units, his antics being greatly amusing to the silent protectors. Naruto looked down bashfully and bowed his head slightly. "I'm Naruto Uzumaki, sir." The teenager turned his head towards the younger boy that had finally made it down the tree and placed his hand on top of his head, much to Tohi's displeasure. "This is my little brother, Sasuke Uchiha." Itachi pulled his hand away as Sasuke tried to sweat at it. "And I'm Itachi Uchiha, it's a pleasure to meet you, Naruto-kun." Naruto looked up at the 12-year-old. "Uchiha, I've heard that name before." "Of course you have," Sasuke interjected loudly. "The Uchiha clan is the most prestigious clan of Konoha, everyone knows who they are ga." He was cut off by his older brother's fist coming down lightly on top of his head. "It's about time you went back home, Sasuke. Mother would get worried otherwise." Sasuke huffed lightly but complied, running off towards the entrance to the training grounds. "Bye, Anai-san, see you, Naruto." Naruto waved back at him, awkwardly watching him leave as Itachi turned back towards the blonde to observe him with a critical eye. "Naruto-kun, may I ask you a question?" Naruto turned back towards the Uchiha. "What is it?" Itachi paused for a second, as if considering what to say. "What drives you to be training at your age?" Naruto blinked in bewilderment. "What drives me?" The Uchiha nodded. "You train to be strong, correct? Why do you wish to be strong?" He frowned and looked down at the floor. "It's more than just wanting to be strong, Itachi-san. I need to be strong." He looked up at the prodigy. "If I don't become strong to protect myself, then who will?" He walked back towards the target, collecting his rocks once more. "Besides," he continued, "I'm gonna become a ninja when I'm older, and Konoha needs a strong Jinchuriki. At least that's what people say." This boy would become a great shinobi, Itachi was sure of that. His potential seemed enormous. Uzumakis in general were something to be feared, with their seemingly unending reserves and high longevity. Not only that, but he contained the strongest of the Bijuu within him, and was already mature enough to understand what it would mean to become a ninja. All he needed was a guiding hand. "You want to impress him, don't you?" Naruto froze at that and turned back towards Itachi as he continued, "You want to prove to him that you can become strong, that you are someone that would be worth training." Naruto quickly turned away once more and went back to his stack of rocks. "I don't know what you're talking about." Itachi smiled. "Naruto-kun," he called out, getting the blonde's attention again. "Watch me closely." The young boy watched on as the taller man laced his fingers together in some strange symbol, with his index and middle fingers extended. He blinked in wonder. Was this another one of those jutsu? Itachi was gone. When had he left? He had no idea. He had blinked and suddenly he wasn't there anymore, vanishing like he was never there to begin with. "This, Naruto-kun," he heard to his right as he turned around to see the Uchiha on a tree branch, 20 meters away from his previous spot. "Is a move that a close friend of mine enjoys quite a lot and has perfected to its maximum capacity." "Whoa, so cool!" Naruto thought in amazement as Itachi hopped down from the tree and walked back towards him. By using this move, a ninja can travel short to long distances depending on your mastery of the technique and how much chakra you put in it. It's accomplished by using the tiger sign, which you saw me do earlier, to temporarily vitalize your body to move at extreme speeds," explained Itachi. "Beginners who first use this move must use hand signs, and a puff of smoke is usually accompanied with it. However, if you refine it until you don't need hand signs anymore and you can use it without making any smoke, it becomes quite the deadly move during a combat." The whiskered boy looked at him in wonder. "Does it have a name?" Itachi smiled back at him. "Everything has a name, Naruto-kun. People, animals, objects, techniques. Even demons?" thought the blonde boy curiously. The Uchiha continued, "This one is called the body flicker technique." He gestured towards the smaller blonde. "Now you try it." Naruto grinned excitedly as he clumsily put his hands together in a poor imitation of the tiger sign and shouted, "Body flicker." A big puff of smoke erupted around him and Naruto found himself barely a meter away upside down. "Oh!" The dark-haired Anbu smiled at the blonde on the ground. "Clouds of smoke are signs of excessive use of chakra. You did not need that much for the distance that you covered. Your hand sign was clumsy, and you did not need to shout out the technique. Thinking it has the same effect." Naruto slowly stood to his feet as he watched the older man begin to make his way out of the clearing. "I want you to keep practicing it so that you can effortlessly use this move by the end of these 6 months with no hand signs and no smoke. That way you can give the commander a nice surprise." Naruto nodded and smiled. "Thank you, Itachi-san." He turned back towards the training post and grinned to himself in excitement. He could now do 2 jutsus. The shadow clone, although he still needed a lot of practice for that one, and the body flicker. He was gonna be unstoppable. The next match would not end the same way the last one had. "How many times must you bother me before you are satisfied?" A familiar scene was being played out inside his mindscape. a blonde child sitting in front of the cage of a giant fox. Something has been niggling at his mind, ever since his conversation with Itachi. Naruto looked up at the face Kyuubi. The fox hadn't blasted him with that weird pressure that time, and he seemed to be less angry and growly than before. He didn't know why, but he was acting different somehow, almost like he was too tired to fight him. I was wondering, Naruto ignored the slight snort of the giant beast. Someone told me that everything had names, be it objects, animals, techniques. He looked up at the fox that was now watching him in suspicion. Do you have one as well? Or is it just Kyuubi? Kyuubi narrowed his eyes. No one had ever called him by his name, save for his siblings and the sage. And there was a good reason for it. His name besides his creation was the only thing given to him by the one that had brought him into this world, the only man he respected and could call father. It was a sacred thing to him, and he doubted that he would ever be telling it to anyone else. My name, rumbled the Nine Tails, is the one thing that I have from the only man that has earned my respect. It keeps me grounded and is proof that I am my own being, and not just a mindless beast or a weapon of destruction. He glared down at the blonde. Kyuubi is merely a title given to me by you foolish mortals. You will never know me name, human. You have not earned the right, nor will you ever earn it. Naruto frowned as his gaze turned back to the wet floor. Your name must be pretty important to you, huh? But you do have one. A small grin made its way to his face as his eyes met with the fox's once more. That must mean that someone cared about you enough to give you one. His grin turned slightly mischievous. And I'm gonna find out what your name is someday, one way or another. You better believe it. The Nine Tails snorted and closed his eyes, resting his head on top of his hands once more. Naruto pushed himself up onto his legs and walked a bit closer to the cage. Hey, are there other Nine Tails? Or are you the only one? There is only one of me, morsel, growled out the bijou, not bothering to open his eyes. Naruto's eyes softened. I see. That must be pretty lonely. A giant eye cracked open, a single red orb staring intensely at the much smaller human. Why couldn't this annoying human just leave him alone? After a moment's hesitation, the Nine Tails decided to answer. I have siblings, though they are different creatures, each having an increasing amount of tails. I am the one with the most. The blonde nodded slowly. Yeah, I've heard there were other bijus, they've all been sealed off as well. He frowned as an angry look appeared on his face, much to the Nine Tails' interest. It's not right. Bijus are living, breathing creatures, just like you. They don't deserve to be imprisoned, they should be free. All was silent in the cage, save for the continuous dripping of the sewers of his mind. The Nine Tails stared at the blonde impassively as said boy shook his head to dismiss his thoughts. What's it like to have siblings? The Nine Tails gave a small scoff that nearly toppled the Jinchuriki over. Stupid fox. He was so doing that on purpose. It's like being stuck in a never-ending nightmare of fights, rivalry, and continuous bouts for dominance. Especially with GY. He stopped suddenly, a frown marring his face as he caught himself before he revealed too much. He wasn't used to this, he hadn't had a long conversation like this with anyone in a while. If Naruto noticed his abrupt stop, he didn't show it. Instead, he continued to smile wistfully. Do you miss them? The Nine Tails closed his eyes once more in disinterest. Why would I ever miss those blithering fools? Even if he said that, the way the fox's tail subtly curled up behind him told the blonde boy a whole different story. The holder of the Nine Tails smiled knowingly. He didn't have any siblings, but he was sure that if he did, he would be missing them immensely. And that person who gave you a name, is he still around? Kyuubi's eyes remained closed. It's time for you to leave, human. You've overstayed your welcome. Naruto grinned sheepishly as he held up two hands placatingly. All right, no need to snap. He turned around and began walking away. Once he reached the middle of the room, he turned back towards the Nine Tails. Hey, Kyuubi. Kyuubi eyelids cracked open, watching his warden from the corner of his eyes. Said warden gave him a small smile. I just wanted you to know, I forgive you. For killing my parents, I mean. At the fox's silence, he continued, you were just trying to be free, and I would have probably done the same in your shoes. So I can't really be upset. Your forgiveness means nothing to me, growled out the great beast. Naruto shrugged and offered the fox a peace sign, and after mere moments, vanished from the mindscape. The Nine Tails stared at the spot that the blonde boy was in for a few seconds before closing his eyes and placing his head on his hands once more. Thanks, Midori-san, a blonde youth yelled over his shoulder as he ran out of the weapons shop. Today marked the last day of his training regimen given to him by the mysterious bipolar commander, and to celebrate, he had bought himself his very first kunai. The now 7-year-old ran through the streets of Konoha, the midday sun shining its rays upon the populace of the village hidden in the leaves. Gotta get there in time. He was cutting it close. He was supposed to be meeting Kakashi back at Training Ground 7 at exactly the same time that they had arrived there the previous year, which was in exactly 3 minutes. But with his training, he was now able to travel at much greater speed than before. Jumping out of the foliage, he finally arrived at his destination right as the sun was leaving its zenith, marking the start of the afternoon. Panting lightly and wiping the sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand, Naruto looked around for any signs of the one-eyed scarecrow. Strange, no one was here. He was sure of that. A foot crashing into his back interrupted his train of thoughts. The Jinchuriki yelped as he was pinned down onto the floor, the foot from earlier holding him down. Tilting his head slightly, Naruto was met with the snarling mask of ANBU Commander Dog, who was staring back at him coldly. "You weren't ready," he said stoically. Naruto grunted and attempted to wriggle himself free from beneath the older man's foot. "How the hell was I supposed to know you would sneak up on me like that?" He struggled to get out. "That's not fair." "Life isn't fair," replied the ANBU commander. "The sooner you learn that, the better." Dog removed his foot from the boy's back and kicked him in his side, launching him into the same damn tree from last year, much to the Uzumaki's chagrin. "Ho? Interesting." Dog thought, intrigued. The boy's reflexes were impressive. Sadly, it wasn't enough. Quickly yanking his hand out of the boy's grasp, he spun around on his foot and drove his heel on the side of the blonde's cranium, sending him flying away once more. Hearing a ruffling noise behind him, he spun around only to see a second Naruto. The clone rushed at him, brandishing a deadly kunai from his pocket as it began to swing the sharp object at him wildly in an attempt to catch him. Dog easily caught the wrist of the smaller boy and twisted it, making it yell out in pain. Bending low, he delivered a straight punch into the doppelganger's sternum, making it dispel. Turning around once more to face the original, he found him higher up the tree on a low-hanging branch, having used the distraction to get onto higher ground. Making the tiger seal, Dog took in a large amount of air and blew a medium-sized fireball at him. Naruto gasped as he threw himself to the side, narrowly avoiding the giant ball of heat. Glaring down at the ANBU, he pulled out his kunai, the metal glinting slightly in the sunlight. He quickly wiped the blood dripping in his eye that had appeared because of the man's kick from earlier, and crouched down low, pushing himself off the tree, and vanishing from view. Shunshin no Jutsu. Dog wasn't one of Konoha's greatest shinobi for nothing, however, his eyes easily keeping track of the blonde soaring towards him. Using the back of his hand to knock away the oncoming kunai being held by the boy, his other hand went to the blonde's throat, wrapping around it tightly and crashing him into the floor once more. His foot quickly came down on the boy's wrist, pinning his hand down and subsequently rendering his kunai useless. Dog stared into the stubborn face of the young boy beneath him, meeting his glare unflinchingly. With a slight nod of his head, he removed his foot and stood up, walking back a few paces to allow room for the boy to recollect himself. Naruto coughed slightly and rubbed his sore throat, slowly picking himself up as he watched the man in front of him remove his ANBU mask. "You've improved," remarked Kakashi as he lazily placed his hands in his pockets. "And picked up a few tricks as well, I see." The man looked like he barely even broke a sweat, while Naruto was standing there, panting with drying blood on his face. He still had a long way to go. Kakashi inclined his head towards the wound apologetically, his eye curving up in a sheepish manner. "Sorry about that." Naruto shrugged. "It'll heal." Kakashi nodded and sat down on the grass, crossing his legs as Naruto followed suit. "Your reflexes have improved, and I see you've pulled off the clone jutsu and Shunshin with no hand seals. Well done. That's not an easy feat." Naruto lowered his head bashfully. He wasn't used to receiving compliments. "Ah, thanks." The copy nin reached into his pouch to take out a scroll, one looking identical to the one he'd given to him last year, and tossed it to the boy. The blonde caught it clumsily, fumbling slightly as his hands were still shaky from the adrenaline. Opening the scroll a quarter of the way, he caught a quick glimpse of the contents. "Hand seals, tree walking, fighting katas." Now, chided Kakashi lightly as the boy quickly closed the scroll. "You can read through it later on. For now, let's talk about what went wrong during the spar." "Some spar more like a one-sided beatdown," thought the blonde sourly. Nevertheless, Naruto nodded and thought back to the fight. "I wasn't aware of my surroundings when I came here." The masked man nodded. "What else?" At Naruto's silence, he pressed on. "You blindly rushed at an enemy that was clearly stronger than you were. While your guts were admirable, and you were armed while I wasn't, I am still a shinobi while you are merely a civilian in training. It would have been better for you to keep your distance and assess the situation." Naruto sighed, but agreed with all of it. In the heat of the battle, he hadn't really found the time to fall back and think of a strategy. He was startled as Kakashi was suddenly in front of him, with a hand resting on top of his head. "Good work, kid, I'm proud of you. Don't slack off with your training." With a small wave of his hand, the shinobi disappeared. Naruto didn't move for a few minutes, staring down at the grass as he let the nine tails work its magic on his wounds. Those words echoed within his mind, playing back like a recording. Good work, I'm proud of you. A small smile appeared on his face as a warm feeling fluttered within his chest. Maybe that guy wasn't so bad after all. The Hokage puffed on his wooden pipe as he stared out his window into the streets of Konoha, a futile attempt of calming his frayed nerves. Subtly glancing to his right, he looked upon the stoic as ever figure of his former teammate, Danzo Shimura, also known as the Shinobi no Yami because of his frequent unsanctioned actions. Danzo was an old man, about Hiruzen's age, with short dark hair that framed bandages wrapped around his forehead and right eye. He had a scar in the shape of an X on his chin, and wore a black robe that hid his right arm from view. The warmonger was a shinobi that liked things done in a particular way. Where Hiruzen wanted things resolved peacefully, Danzo wanted to take action with extreme prejudice. He was the yin to his yang, the shadow to his light. Their difference of opinion has caused a rift to form between the two teammates over the years, with neither of them ever seeing eye to eye. Both veterans were waiting for the arrival of an extra guest, one that had piqued the old war hawk's interest ever since the beginning of the Third Shinobi War. Though the subject of this night's meeting was about another of Danzo's person of interest, one certain Jinchuriki. The door opened and both men turned towards the entrance, watching as a man in a dog mask immediately kneeled down in front of the old Saratobi. "Rise, dog," commanded the fire shadow. Dog did so and regarded both occupants of the room. "Hokage-sama," he greeted. Tilting his head to the side, he gave a curt nod. "Danzo. Let's get into the matter at hand," the Warhawk said without wasting time. "ANBU Commander Dog, you have been training Konoha's weapon, have you not?" "I have been giving training tips to Uzumaki Naruto," he corrected, stressing out his name. Danzo's single visible eye narrowed slightly as he turned towards the Hokage. "What is the meaning of this, Hiruzen?" he drawled out in a low tone. "I was told that the Jinchuriki wouldn't be receiving training in order to form bonds within the village and assure his loyalty. That was the reasoning behind you not allowing me custody of the child." Hiruzen turned away from the streets of Konoha to place frigid eyes upon his teammate. "That is Hokage-sama to you, Danzo," he said in a warning tone. "I may be old, but I am known as the god of shinobi for a reason. Do not test me." Danzo's face remained impassive, but he pressed on. "The Uzumaki child would thrive under my care, you know that he would. I can give him the training he needs to become the ultimate weapon that the leaf needs during these dire times. Konoha is weak, Hiruzen. The Sannin are gone, so is the Yondaime. It may not be long before Kumo and Iwa muster the courage to come knocking at our proverbial doors once more. Must I remind you that both of them hold 2 Jinchurikis, as opposed to our one?" The frown on the monkey summoner's face deepened. "I will not have you turn Naruto into a mindless drone." A small sneer appeared on Danzo's face. "And what alternative do you propose?" Dog unclipped his mask from his face, drawing the attention of the 2 other occupants. A set of mismatched eyes glared into the singular black orb of Danzo's. "Danzo, let's make one thing clear here," began Kakashi in a low tone. "Naruto is not your property, nor is he an object. He is a citizen of the village hidden in the leaves, and is the child of our 4th Hokage." Kakashi's voice held an edge to it. Cold fury writhing beneath the surface, a stark contrast to his usual laid-back tone. "More than that, I have decided to become the boy's silent guardian, protecting him from vultures that would seek the power he holds for their own foolish goals or ideals." The young Hitaki took a step forward, the tomos in his red eyes spinning threateningly, putting the shadow shinobi on edge. "I am not able to be a real part of his life due to my duties as an ANBU. But that will not stop me from shielding him from people like you. Hear me, Danzo, hell will freeze over before I let you come near him. If one day somehow you, or anyone else were to get a hold of him, then so help me I will raze this village to the ground. As long as I draw breath, no harm will come to the boy. No matter who the culprit may be, I will stop at nothing to protect my teacher's legacy." Danzo frowned at the Kapinin. "Those words you speak are those of a traitor. Is this really the path that you would choose, Hitaki?" Kakashi met the warmonger's glare head-on. If that is what it would come to, then so be it. And he meant those words. He had nothing left to lose. Nothing except for this small boy who was given a burden too great to carry by himself. Hiruzen glanced towards the teenager. "Kakashi, remember where you are," he warned. "Danzo, this conversation is over. Speak no more on the matter." Danzo's eyes narrowed further as he made his way to the exit. "I hope you know what you're doing, Hokage-sama," he said as he opened the door. "For the sake of Konoha, the village that our fathers have built." The war veteran stepped out and closed the door with a small click. Silence consumed the office once more, neither residents moving or saying anything. With a small sigh, Saratobi turned back towards the window, an action that always seemed to relax him. "Kakashi," he said softly, getting the ANBU agent's attention. "I know where your loyalties lie. If it ever came down to the wire, I know that you would choose Naruto over the village. When he received no reply, he continued. You are the Leaf's strongest shinobi right now. I cannot afford to lose you or to suspend you. For that, I have allowed you some leniency. But know this. Hiruzen turned towards Kakashi and locked eyes with him. If the time ever comes, know that I will do whatever must be done to protect Konoha. If it comes down to it, I will put you down myself. Student of the fourth or not, protector of our Jinchuriki or not, I will not let another Orochimaru come to be. You have been warned. Kakashi said nothing, choosing to only give him a small tilt of the head instead. His message was clear. Run if you must, do not fight Konoha. With a salute, Kakashi disappeared from the room, leaving the old Sandaime alone with his thoughts once more. He really was getting too old for this shit. Itachi turned his head to look at his younger brother that was being carried onto his back. How come the one who twisted his ankle is the one who's laughing? He asked with a small knowing smile. Or maybe you were just looking for a way to get out of walking home. A small pout appeared on the face of the 7-year-old. That's not it. I just can't stop thinking about how I'm gonna start the academy tomorrow. Now I'll finally get the chance to catch up to you. As Sasuke was lost in his daydreaming, Itachi's smile disappeared and was replaced by a frown as he stared at the ground. Itachi, have you made up your mind yet? Asked a man wearing a mask and a thick black coat. If you haven't, then we will be forced to take action instead. Itachi looked up quickly from his kneeling position. No, please wait. I need more time, he said frantically. It will be too late once things start to move, said the man in the cloak. The situation is dire. A pained frown settled upon the face of the Uchiha. I understand I shall settle this with my own hands. Big brother? Sasuke said as he saw Itachi lost in his thoughts again. He'd been doing that a lot recently. Itachi glanced behind him and offered him a small smile. It's nothing, Sasuke. Hummed Sasuke. I wonder if that blonde kid we met a while ago will be there as well. He seemed nice. An idea popped up in Itachi's head. Sasuke. His little brother snapped out of his reverie and looked at him. Once you start the academy, I want you to become friends with him. Sasuke raised an eyebrow. Why? Itachi merely chuckled. It will be good for you. You don't have any friends of your own age. His gaze turned back to the road ahead as a small frown found its way back onto his face, ignoring his brother's indignant grumbling behind his back. Training, and more training. That was all he'd been doing these past 2 months. And while he did like growing stronger and learning new things, he was quickly becoming tired of the unending routine of getting up, running through the village in a half-awake daze, practicing this stupid tree walking or whatever it was called. Doing those strange hand movements from the scroll over and over again incessantly. He needed a change in scenery. Which was why you could now see the small frame of a blond boy sneaking his way through the Uchiha compound. Those police force people or whatever they were called were always being mean to him, always sneering at him and carelessly bumping into him with all the care of an inebriated bovine farm animal. It was time for a little revenge. He'd hatched a brilliant prank. Uchihas were all about their stuck-up attitudes and their high and mighty shirts with those fans on them, so why not dye them pink? It was perfect. Not only would it stick it to those Uchihas that a 7-year-old had managed to sneak past them, but it would also make a joke out of their beloved crests. Hopefully that dreadful eye of theirs would burn the image of their defaced symbol into their mind for a long while. Yes, this was just what he needed. He missed that rush, that daring feeling of going into the unknown and becoming the mastermind behind an unsuspecting victim's bad day. Everything was going well. Almost too well. Okay, what the hell? Is security always this lax? Perhaps it was because of the fact that the clan estates were now on the outskirts of Konoha? Or maybe they believed that no one would ever dare to break into the esteemed manors. Regardless, this worked well for him, so he wasn't about to complain. He managed to tiptoe his way through the mini-market district of the compound, making his way on a random porch and ever so slowly sliding one of the paper doors open. Weren't Uchihas proficient with fire? Those flimsy walls were definitely a health hazard. Get back here, you pervert! He briefly considered following those orders and going back to mess with her. After all, there was nothing funnier than seeing people's gobsmacked expressions when he did that. But even he knew not to test the righteous fury of an angered woman. He'd managed to sneak inside the bedroom of an unsuspecting Uchiha and, after making sure that it was indeed empty, had started looking for one of those blue shirts that all the clan members seemed to wear. What he hadn't expected was to reach inside the first drawer and pulling out a pair of black undergarments, which had Izumi etched in girly writing on the label. He'd been so surprised that he quickly shut the drawer closed once more a bit too loudly. The door slammed open and lights were turned on, revealing the 7-year-old with a hand on the underwear drawer. One thing led to another, and he now had a 13-year-old brunette chasing after him, spouting out obscenities so rude they would make a sailor blush. I wasn't looking at your underwear, promise. yelled the terrified blonde over his shoulder as he sprinted out of the compound, the girl still hot on his tail. Said girl merely growled angrily. You think I'm gonna believe that, you little shit? I said come back here. Never. The chase went on for a few good minutes, though luckily for Naruto, he managed to lose her in the crisscrossing alleys a long way away from the Uchiha clan. Panting to catch his breath, he rested a hand right above his furiously beating heart. Man, women are scary. The sudden sound of footsteps made him spin around, thinking that that girl had found him once more, though he relaxed slightly when he saw it wasn't the Uchiha he was expecting. Itachi? He said hesitantly, struggling to remember the name of the man that had taught him the body flicker. The prodigy was dressed in those clothes he would see Kakashi or Dog dressed in sometimes, though unlike him, he wasn't wearing a mask. Itachi seemed to have barely noticed him, being too lost in his thoughts to see the smaller boy. Itachi looked up slowly, startled out of his musings. Oh, Naruto-kun. He greeted in that same soft tone that he remembered. Naruto smiled and ran up to him in excitement. Hey, thanks again for teaching me that body flicker, crowed Naruto. Kakashi was really impressed thanks to you. Itachi offered him a weak smile. I'm glad. The Uzumaki frowned in worry. The Uchiha seemed like he was carrying a lot of guilt, if the tense shoulders and slightly bowed head was of any indication. Maybe one of those ANBU missions he'd heard Kakashi talk about had gone wrong? Naruto began Itachi hesitantly. The blonde looked up at the taller man, head tilted to the side in acknowledgement. The dark-haired teen's eyes left the ground and locked onto the ones of the blonde. Please look after Sasuke for me. Huh? Was his confused reply. The teen's eyes began to bleed to red, and before he knew it, his whole world had gone dark. When he came to the next morning, an entire clan had been slaughtered by the hands of the pacifist prodigy. None had been spared. None save for Sasuke and Izumi Uchiha. 10 months later. He could feel him. Last time, he had taken him by surprise. But this time, he was ready. He had been training relentlessly for this moment. He quickly strapped his short blade to his back, one of his most recent purchases. The scroll had made him practice kenjutsu katas with a stick, and after a year of that, he thought he was finally ready to wield the real thing. He threw his window open and jumped out into the streets of Konoha. Left, right, he was moving far faster than he was last year, easily traveling through the streets in record time thanks to the help of chakra and quick bursts of the Shunshin. One thing that made it difficult to use that move too much was the tunnel vision that usually came with it. But after spending a whole year and a half practicing, he was now so accustomed to it he could now barely feel a thing. He burst through the foliage, heedless of anything but the feel of his chakra. His gaze locked onto the lazy hunched figure of the Jonin reading his book. There he was. Placing his hand on the hilt of his tanto, he closed the distance in the blink of an eye with another use of the Shunshin, and freed his blade from its hilt. Kakashi didn't even look up as the short blade was effortlessly stopped by a kunai. Geez, he hadn't even seen him pull it out. Now, the Hatake chided lightly, eyes never leaving his book. No need to be so eager. Naruto's face, who had been contorted into one of great effort, shifted into strained amusement as he put all of his weight behind the sword in an attempt to make the taller man budge. TCH, should have known it wouldn't be that easy. The masked man hummed in agreement. Perhaps, but still a good effort. He disappeared from his line of sight, making the Jinchuriki nearly fall at the sudden lack of resistance. Behind you. The blonde whipped around and quickly launched himself back with the use of the body flicker. Skidding backwards into a stop, he brought his arm back and threw his tanto at Kakashi. The blade soared through the air and speared the head of the Jonin, who stumbled backwards in surprise and dropped to the floor, unmoving. Naruto froze as his eyes widened. What the heck? Had he killed him? How? He was supposed to be one of the strongest shinobi in this village. The unmoving figure suddenly disappeared in a puff of smoke, and Naruto released the breath he'd been holding in. His relief was short-lived, though, as metal wires suddenly tightened around him, locking his arms to his sides and nearly slicing his skin. Don't get distracted, reprimanded the copycat, appearing out of thin air in front of him. Naruto glared at the wires in frustration before a mischievous grin pulled its way onto his lips. The Uzumaki disappeared as a wooden log took his place from within the stringy confines. Substitution, huh? Thought Kakashi to himself. He was impressed. The boy was making great progress with his training. His strikes felt stronger, and his movements faster and more fluid. The sound of footsteps on grass drew his attention as he blocked a tanto strike aimed at the back of his neck with a kunai, the longer blade coming dangerously close to his skin. And his stealth, at least all those pranks were good for something. He jumped away as a second tanto rushed at him, two blonde blurs now swinging the deadly blades around. He easily weaved in between their surprisingly coordinated strikes, ducking under an overhead slash and using his low center of gravity to sweep at the clone's feet. The doppelganger tripped, and was struck in the head with the butt of the kunai. Although he wouldn't admit it to the blonde in fear of stroking his ego, the Sharingan wielder admired the way Naruto learned new techniques. He would practice them relentlessly, every single day until he could do them instinctually with minimal effort. The 3 moves that he knew, the shadow clone, body flicker, the substitution, they were all trained to perfection, each manifested with no smoke and no hand seals. It really was impressive. Kakashi had met jonins that hadn't had that level of mastery. The second clone quickly put his tanto away and rushed at Kakashi, jumping high to make up for the height difference and throwing a punch at the jonin's face. Predictably, the punch was easily caught and Kakashi yanked the blonde towards him, delivering a powerful punch to its face. Being rid of the 2 clones, the masked man decided to switch to offense and flipped his reverse hold of the kunai to a normal hold. He was upon the blonde in seconds, the knife already in motion to be plunged into the boy's larynx. It took every ounce of Naruto's newfound reflexes and speed to raise his tanto for protection, both blades clashing in between them. The 2 stared into each other's eyes, one aloof with a slight edge behind it, and the other blazing with fierce determination. Kakashi put more force behind his weapon, forcing the tanto away and landing a painful front kick into the boy's sternum. Naruto grunted and was pushed back, though he managed to remain on his feet this time. He ducked under a kunai swing from Kakashi and did his best to deflect the following ones. Sparks flew as steel met steel repeatedly, the only thing standing between Naruto and painful cuts being his liberal use of shunshin. Time to end this, thought the copycat. He'd seen enough. Disappearing in a burst of speed, Kakashi reappeared behind Naruto far faster than the blonde could see, his hand coming down into a downwards chop. His hand never made contact with the soft squishy feel of skin, however, instead being stopped by something hard and cold. His eyes opened wide in surprise as an ethereal golden chain stopped him from striking his neck. A feral grin appeared on the face of the Jinchuriki. This isn't over yet. The chain lashed out, pushing the jonin back as Naruto sprang into action, his chain following behind him like a golden tail. He threw a right hook at the taller man, which was avoided, then spun around quickly, the chain whipping around and striking Kakashi in the side. Kakashi turned into a wooden log as the vicious lynx gouged into the bark. Naruto quickly looked left and right in search of the silver-haired man, but froze when he felt cold steel against the back of his neck and a foot on his chakra chain pinning it into place. Yield, commanded Kakashi. Naruto didn't move for a few seconds out of pure stubbornness. After a while, though, he sighed and raised his hands in surrender. Kakashi nodded and pulled the knife away, taking a step back as the blonde Jinchuriki collapsed onto the ground in exhaustion. All was quiet in the training ground, the sound of the blonde boy huffing loudly as he caught his breath being the only noise. Kakashi silently watched as the golden chain vanished into dust, frowning in thought at the phenomenon. There's no mistaking it. That's Kushina's ability. What happened to your mask? The Hitaki blinked and looked up at the blonde. What was that? Naruto pointed at his hip. Your mask, you're usually always with it. Where did it go? True enough, Kakashi felt the clear uncomfortable absence of weight of the familiar carved face on his hip. Oh, that. He winced and glanced down, debating how to explain it. Dog is gone for now. The blonde raised an eyebrow, but in the end decided to flop back down onto his back. He was too tired to care about some stupid mask. Dog sucked anyway. The jonin slowly approached him and sat down next to him. So those chains. I know, they're pretty cool, right? They surprised me too at first. Quite. Agreed Kakashi. How did you first, A pause. Make them? The blonde gave him a small sheepish smile as he ran his fingers through the soft grass. Hee hee, funny story. A memory flashed through his brain, walking down the stairs, tripping, heading face first into the concrete floor only to be saved by a chain wrapping around the railing next to the stairs. I was interrogating some enemy shinobi and I ran out of wires, so when I thought about what else I could use as bindings, these came out. I see, Kakashi said in a deadpan. He totally did not believe him, but he didn't press it. Naruto opened his mouth, but quickly shut it closed with a small click. After a few more silent moments, he leaned up onto his elbows to look at the older man. Hey, Kakashi? He asked hesitantly. Came the lazy reply. My mom, he began as he saw the man's eye shift to look at him. She had that ability as well, didn't she? The jonin watched Naruto carefully. He wouldn't lie to him. If the boy found out the truth on his own accord, then that was something that could not be helped. He owed him that much at least. Yes, she did. The blonde lied back down as he stared up the sky. And she used those against the 9 tails. He tilted his head towards the man once more. When he got sealed into me. Kakashi nodded once more. She did. Naruto sighed softly as he closed his eyes. That was something that he appreciated from the scarecrow. He told him the truth, and he didn't ask uncomfortable questions. He cared about the old man, he really did, but he was hiding too many things from him. He didn't think he could ever trust him like he trusted Kakashi. That thought made him pause. He trusted Kakashi because he was the only one that has been truthful to him. The only one that had given him the time of day with no ulterior motives. The only one who felt genuine. But why? Why are you doing all of this for me? He muttered suddenly. But Kakashi understood perfectly. Was this the right time? Naruto definitely was a lot more mature and responsible than other kids his age, but he was still just that, a kid. One prone to his emotions like any other kids his age. No more lies. I owe it to your parents. Naruto shot up into a sitting position, furious and slightly misty eyes glaring into his. Who the hell are my parents? You and the old man, you're always saying my parents this and my parents that, but you've never given me a straight answer. Kakashi heaved a sigh. Have you ever had a good look at the portraits inside the Hokage's office? Naruto frowned and wiped his eyes with the back of his sleeves. Portraits creep me out. What does this have to do with anything? That's all you'll get out of me. That is plenty for you to figure it out on your own, replied Kakashi with finality, making the blonde frown and nod reluctantly. The scarecrow reached inside his pouch and pulled out a slip of paper. Take this. Naruto raised an eyebrow and looked at the piece of paper curiously. What is it? He asked as he took it in his hands. He flipped the paper over, checking each side. Yep, just a regular piece of paper. Channel your chakra into it, instructed the Jonin. Naruto frowned and did just that, molding the mystical energy from his core and guiding it through his pathways, down his arm and into the piece of paper. To his surprise, the paper got cleanly cut into two from the middle. Whoa, said the blonde wonder in slight awe. That's cool. What does it mean? Kakashi hummed and rubbed his chin in thought. Huh. That complicated things. Not many people were attuned to the wind element in Konoha, or in High no Kuni in general. Good job today, go rest up. With that, the masked scarecrow disappeared in a hurry. Huh! Hey! Naruto scrambled to his feet and shouted out at the empty field. What do I do now? Do I just keep doing the same training? Silence met his question as he looked around in slight confusion. After seeing that the masked man really was gone, determination creeped onto his face as he set his gaze towards the direction of the Hokage's tower. 10 minutes later. Hokage-sama? He's in a meeting with the council right now, Naruto-kun. You can wait for him in his office if you want, the secretary said as she scribbled down on some paperwork. There was nothing to fear after all, everyone knew that Naruto and the Hokage had a really close relationship. Naruto nodded gratefully. Thanks, Eri. Once he was inside, he looked around the quiet room with slight apprehension. There were 4 portraits hung on the right side of the room, all with expensive-looking golden frames adorning them. Slowly making his way to the portraits, he looked at each of them carefully. The first one was a tall man with tan skin and long black hair with 2 strands framing a red bandana. He had a big smile on his face, suggesting a goofy and carefree attitude. He was wearing the same robes that Hiruzenjiji wore all the time. A previous Hokage, perhaps? He looked towards the second one. The man was wearing the Hokage hat, but he could see shaggy silver hair poking out from beneath it. 3 red lines were drawn onto his face, one on each cheekbone and one going vertically on his chin. He was wearing a custom-looking headband, almost looking like a half-helmet that protected his forehead and the sides of his face. His eyes were a surprising shade of red, and unlike the previous Hokage, he had a stern look and seemed to be staring right into his soul. The third one was easy to recognize. It was the old man, though he looked a little younger. That was super weird. There was a time where he didn't look like an old fossil. So, the 2 previous portraits were probably the first and second Hokage respectively. His eyes landed on the 4th and final portrait, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. Spiky blonde hair, bright blue eyes, a kind smile. This was no doubt the 4th Hokage, the man that had sealed the 9 tails inside of him. He'd never seen a close-up picture of him before, only having seen the carved face on the mountain. But it was a bit difficult to make out any defining features from there. Your father looks a lot like you, so much so that it's scary. Kakashi's voice rung out inside his head. No. He stumbled back, his entire body feeling numb from the shock. He leaned against the Hokage's desk as he tried to process the millions of thoughts raging through his mind, much too fast for him to keep up with. A smaller framed picture sitting on the desk caught his attention, one amongst many others that were there. A picture of that same blonde man hugging a woman with scarlet red hair. Red hair was a common trait amongst Uzumaki clan members. He remembered reading during his research of his heritage. No. But that damned Uzumaki, she held me down with her pesky chains before I could finish the deed. The voice of the 9-tailed growled. I've been passed down, from one container to another like some type of family heirloom. He felt something click in his head. It all suddenly made sense. His mother was the previous container. His mother had held down the 9 tails as his father sealed it into him. Both died afterwards, leaving him all alone. Kakashi had been trained by his father, that was why he was taking such an interest in him. The reason why the third never told him was because he knew how he would react to the news. Lies, 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 all lies. He felt his breathing pick up as his head began to swim. No, that couldn't be possible, could it? There was no way he could possibly be his son. Not with how he was being treated. What kind of father even sealed a giant beast of mass destruction inside of their own son? Lord Forth was a pretty smart and analytic person. I believe he would pick the person best suited for the job. He did the only thing he could think of. He ran. He threw the door open with a bang and ran as fast as he could out of the office, leaving a worried hidden ANBU behind. He ran down the corridor, down the stairs, out the main entrance, down the streets of Konoha. His heart hammered in his chest as tears trailed down his face. He kept running, past Kinta's shop, past the academy, past his apartment, past the great gates of Konoha. He had to get away from here. He didn't know where he would go, but he couldn't be here right now. He couldn't face anyone. He ignored the calls of the 2 men in green vests guarding the entrance, and kept running past the tree lines. Where the hell is he going? A man with long spiky hair and a bandage covering the bridge of his nose said in confusion. The man next to him, with the longer hair and bandana, frowned at the tree lines. I don't know, Kotetsu. We should probably go inform the Hokage. No. Let him go. Both men turned around in surprise. Ah, Kakashi-san. I didn't see you there. Izumo frowned in worry. Are you sure he'll be all right? Kakashi looked off into the direction that his pseudo-student had ran to with a slight frown. He'll be fine. Both gate guards looked at each other in confusion. Sasuke-kun, Sasuke-kun. Do you want me to walk you home? Sasuke-kun, I can carry your bag for you. Sasuke-kun, you looked so cool during the spars today. Sasuke turned away and stuffed his hands inside of his pockets in disinterest as a group of annoying academy girls fought for his attention. He was used to it though. Ever since he started the academy exactly a year ago, it has been like that. He was the class idol, the boy who everybody wanted to befriend. The prodigy. One of the last remaining Uchiha. This last year had been something else. So much had happened, and it felt like it had been dragging on for so long, yet 12 months ago seemed like it was just yesterday. He'd started the academy, hoping to do well there and impress his big brother. Yet that same big brother went crazy and ended up murdering his entire clan, with the exception of him and Izumi. Speaking of Izumi, she had insisted that he move in with her. Her reasoning being that she didn't think he'd be able to take care of himself, and that she wanted him away from the place he found his parents' corpse to avoid phantom memories. He didn't quite understand her reasoning though, the entire clan compound was tainted in his opinion. Despite that, he was really grateful for her. He was sure that he would have lost it, all by himself. Even though he never interacted with her before the genocide, the two became closer, almost becoming like brother and sister. He didn't know what drove Itachi to spare her as well, but he was glad. He arrived near the gated entrances and pushed one of the doors opened, the metal gates creaking and groaning in protest. He made his way further down the estate, walking past several residences and only pausing when his old home came into view. Is that you, Sasuke? He heard Izumi call out to him. The 8-year-old Uchiha sighed and made his way inside the house of the brunette, who was sorting through her ninja equipment in her shinobi attire. Going on a mission? He questioned as he tossed his bag on the table of the living room. Izumi looked towards him and smiled as she stood up. Yup, got assigned today. How was the academy? She asked while attaching her pouch to her pants. Sasuke just shrugged and sat on one of the chairs in the living room. It was fine, he answered simply. The girl nodded, used to his short replies by now. As she stood to make her way out, the youngest of the two sat up straighter in his chair and called out to her. Izumi? She turned around and looked at the boy. I was thinking, he began uneasily. How come Itachi didn't you know? The girl winced as Sasuke fumbled uncomfortably with his words. Kill you? That question had puzzled Izumi as well. Itachi knew her, they spoke regularly. He would have noticed that she wasn't in the clan towards the time of the murder. Perhaps he hadn't had the time to look for her. Or maybe he didn't have the heart. The implications towards the second option scared her. I got lucky, she answered after a few seconds of silence. I wasn't in the clan at the time. Some blonde kid with whiskers broke into my house and was trying to dye my clothes as a prank, go figure. She smiled grimly and shrugged. If it wasn't for him, I'd probably be dead as well. He saved my life in a weird way. Sasuke remained quiet as Izumi waved at him and exited her house. He'd only seen one blonde kid with whiskers around the village. That same blonde kid that he'd met training. That same blonde kid that Itachi had asked him to befriend. That same blonde kid that seemed to be unanimously hated around the village. He was beginning to see a pattern. He'd been running for at least an hour northwest of Konoha by now, and the trees were becoming fewer and fewer. His fuzzy mind absently recalled the maps he remembered seeing and estimated being a few kilometers away from the borders of Yugakure, also known as the land of hot water. His mad sprint soon slowed into a rapid run, then to a jog, and soon into a slow walk. His eyes never looked ahead of him though, staying locked onto the ground below him as half-lidded dejected eyes stared blankly at the dirt. It's not like anyone will miss me there. That's not true. What about old man Tuchi and I am? What about the Hokage? And Kakashi? He screwed his eyes shut as he shook his head stubbornly, and wiped at his eyes furiously. No! They didn't care. No one did. If they did, they would have told him the truth from the start. He was so lost in his thoughts and his self-wallowing that he barely even noticed the tall muscular man facing away from him with his arms crossed until he bumped into him. How Naruto bounced back and landed on his behind. The man in front of him didn't even move an inch. Yo, that ain't cool, bro. Looking up, Naruto was greeted with the sight of the darkest and most muscular man he'd ever seen in his short life. He had white hair that was combed back and tucked into a white headband depicting the symbol of Kumogakure, the village hidden in the clouds. He had a goatee and wore shades that somehow stayed on even though they had no branches to hold them in place, and carried 8 freaking swords on his back. He had the kanji 4 iron tattooed in blue on his left shoulder, as well as 2 parallel horns under his right eye. Other than that, he seemed to be wearing some stylized version of a cloud ninja uniform. Sorry. I wasn't watching where I was going. Naruto quickly got back up to his feet and wiped his eyes with a sniffle. The man looked down at him with an unreadable expression before a grin broke out onto his face. Don't sweat it, little man. I was just finishing my plan. What are you doing on your own when evening has just begun? Naruto blinked slowly as his tired brain tried to process what the strange man had just said. I'm just taking a walk, I guess. He looked up at the headband tied around his head. What's a Kumo shinobi doing all the way in fire country? The man crossed his arms and bobbed his head to an invisible beat. Had some business to take care of in the land of iron, but I thought I'd take a detour down southern. That kid is a Jinchuriki. A booming voice said inside the Kumo nin's head. Ya ain't gotta tell me that, mighty Hachibi-sama. It's like I'm standing next to Yujito, only cranked up to 100, yo. That's probably because this boy holds the 9 tails. I've told you in the past that the power difference between each tail is increasingly more powerful. Be careful with this one. Oh, alright. I'll see you, I guess. Naruto was about to walk off when the man put a hand on his shoulder. Hold on now, friendo. I know you're not leaving without telling me your name. Don't be giving me no woes. Oh, I'm sorry. Naruto scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. A big grin appeared on the shade-wearing man's face once more as his head and arms made those weird motions once more. You seem to be cool little fish cakes, so I'll tell you my name. Make no mistake. You can call me Master Karabi, 'cause I float like a butterfly and I sting like a killer bee. Naruto took a cautious step back as he slowly nodded his head. Better stay on that guy's good side. I see. Well, it was nice to meet you, Karabi, but I'd better get. He was interrupted as the man was suddenly next to him, an arm thrown over his shoulder in an amicable way. Now, little fox, you don't need to gawk. But I can't let you leave when I see you so down. You gotta tell me what made you frown, fool, you fool. The blonde's eyes narrowed slightly. Why do you want to know that? His brain finally caught up with the rest on the man's sentence. Wait, fox? He threw Karabi's arm away from his shoulder and jumped back a few meters away. How do you know about that? Karabi ignored the smaller boy's suspicion as he began to make some rapping movements that matched his lyrics. You gotta keep it cool, otherwise that would just be cruel. I gotta make sure my fellow Jinchuriki is happy, or my name ain't the mighty killer bee. He finished his dance with a hand thrown in the air, all fingers curled in except for the index and pinky making a crude imitation of horns. The blonde's eyes widened as he took a step towards the man that could probably understand him better than anyone. You mean you're? That's right, sucker. Anything else would be a motherfucker. He is a child. Watch your language, Hachibi yelled inside his head. B winced and massaged his now throbbing temple, making Naruto look at him in concern. Are you alright, Mr. Karabi? B nodded carelessly and went on. Just the old partner in crime giving me a hard time. Naruto took another step forward in amazement. You can talk to him. Karabi grinned widely, idly taking note on how Naruto addressed Hachibi as he nodded his head. You better believe it, bro. If you don't, then I can prove it for show. Just bump your fist against mine, and we'll be done in no time. Fool, you fool. Naruto looked at the extended fist in confusion and stared at his own for a few seconds. After a moment's thought, he walked forward and extended his arm, touching his fist against Karabi's. The strange sensation of vertigo assaulted his senses as he closed his eyes in an effort to contain his lunch. Once the feeling was gone, he slowly opened them to find himself standing in a white void with Karabi in front of him, and a giant bull with the body of an octopus. What the hell was that? No need to fret, lil bro, Hachibi ain't gonna bite you, yo. The Eight Tails lowered his head to be at better level with the little boy. B is right, I asked him to bring you in here to meet you. You said your name was Naruto, right? Naruto nodded quickly as sweat trickled down in face. Why yes. It's nice to meet you, Mr. I mean Hachibi. One of the Eight Tails' tentacles flicked idly behind him. You don't have to worry about that title. My name is Gyuki. Though that fool down here still calls me Hachibi for some reason. Said fool crossed his arms. Nah Hachibi, I mean no disrespect, there's no way I would be paused abruptly and took out a notepad from his pocket, flipping it open and putting one finger under his chin thoughtfully. Expect direct reflect. Anyway. The ox hybrid began after a few seconds of silence. I wanted to speak to you about something. You were planning on leaving your village, right? Don't. You will be hunted down once they see that you're trying to leave. They will kill you and put Kurama inside another vessel. He doesn't need to be subjected to another sealing. The guy's been in enough of those already. Naruto looked up into the giant eyes of the Oxtopus. Kurama? Gyuki frowned. That's the name of Mr. Doom and Gloom inside of you. At the look of panic appearing on the whiskered boy's face, he continued. I'm not surprised he didn't tell you. Naruto looked down glumly. I wanted him to tell me when I finally gained his trust. That's no doubt an admirable trait, though it sure ain't no piece of cake. B is right. We Bijus are naturally wary of humans, the old fox even more so. Said Gyuki. He probably wouldn't tell you even if you were friends just to prove a point. That did nothing to lift Naruto's spirits. Yo Mr. 9, why were you leaving the old tree anyhow? B asked suddenly, no doubt referring to Konoha. Because. Naruto stopped suddenly. Because, he repeated calmer this time. No one will miss me there. Plus, they've done nothing but lie to me ever since I was born. About my parents, about what happened to them, about Karakubi inside my stomach. The blonde paced angrily as both ox and man watched him. I'm better off somewhere else. Karabi pointed at the blue scarf wrapped around the blonde's neck. That scarf around your neck is looking mighty fine, correct me if I'm wrong, but that looks like a gift, Mr. 9. What B is trying to say, Naruto, is that this scarf looks handmade, someone took the time to make it. But above all that, my point about the fox still stands. He doesn't need that grief. Naruto looked down at the floor that seemed bottomless. They were right, it was a gift, and someone did care. He'd finally remembered why Kakashi seemed so familiar a while ago. He felt just like the ANBU that would guard his house the most, and who probably left him this scarf. Even though he had his own strange way of showing it, Kakashi really did care and was the closest thing he had to family now. You're right, I've been acting selfish, I'm sorry. It ain't us you gotta apologize to, your witch, you one mighty Sonafab. B was once again interrupted when a massive tentacle crashed against the back of his head, sending him to the ground. It's time to go home, Naruto. Naruto nodded slowly and soon, the area began to fade away. Once they were back in the real world, the two kept talking for a few minutes, and Karabi decided to accompany the blonde back to the borders of Konoha. Night was beginning to settle in, the time when ninjas truly lived up to their names. The trip was made mainly in silence, with B saying a few raps every now and then and Naruto looking down at the floor, deep in thought once more. An hour later, when they were barely a kilometer away from Konoha, the two came across a familiar-looking masked man leaning against a tree, arms folded and looking at the two. Kakashi! Naruto rushed towards the Jonin, who offered him a nice smile and a ruffle of his hair much to his consternation. The scarecrow looked up and met the shaded eyes of Karabi. After a few seconds, he inclined his head slightly in a show of gratefulness. B returned the gesture after a few seconds. Naruto turned around as B approached them. Will I see you again, Karabi? Karabi grinned and extended his fist once more. You better believe it, little bro, take care of yourself, yo. Naruto bumped his fist against B's with a wide grin and, after waving at him one final time, quickly ran to catch up with Kakashi. The two began their trek back in silence, Naruto not knowing what to say and Kakashi not wanting to say anything. Hesitantly, Naruto's hand came up and held onto the older man's hand. He said softly, his voice catching in his throat. I'm sorry. Kakashi kept on walking, being too surprised by the small show of trust. After a while, though, he tightened his hold around his little brother's hand. Don't worry about it. You know my name, you know my fame, don't be lame. Eight Tails, that's me, the Rappin' Killer Bee. Heads turned as the eccentric Jinchuriki walked through the gates of his village. Many smiled and laughed, realizing that it was only the lovable Enka performer, and went back to their conversations. Merchants that had just arrived in the village stared in bewilderment at the seemingly everyday occurrence. A tailed beast resides inside my hide making beats and rhymes and I'm making them live. It's what a Jinchuriki needs to survive, battle and battle up here in the beehive. A bustin' 19-year-old blonde girl stared at her teacher with a slight frown of worry, nervous sweat trickling down the side of her head. Win after win is the way that it's done. When I'm finished you'll wish we never met, son. Ah yeah! Drop kick! Everyone looked up as a figure descended from the sky and crashed into the unsuspecting host of the Eight Tails, creating a large cloud of dust. When it finally cleared up, everyone could see their Raikage with his foot firmly planted on his brother's face, who was now pinned down on the ground. You haven't learned a thing, have you? Yelled the Raikage in fury. B groaned as he attempted to pull his brother's foot off of his face. What's up, brother? You surprised me too much. I moved his foot away from B's face and grabbed onto his collar, lifting him up and shaking his limp body around. I let you go out on a mission for the first time in years, and what's the first thing that you do? You leave your team all alone and go your own way. You fool! B raised both his arms and extended his index and thumb to make his hands look like guns. The universe works in mysterious ways, bro. Who knows what it's got in store, yo? A vein throbbed on the Raikage's forehead. My patience is running thin, B. Do you want me to introduce you to my Iron Claw again? No, brother, that Iron Claw is too much of a killer. Will you please stop that annoying rapping? You suck, muttered Gyuki in annoyance. B dropped his head in defeat. No one could appreciate good Enka around here. The Jinchuriki looked towards his brother and, after taking note of the increasing anger on his face and the veins bulging on his head and neck, decided to quickly continue. It ain't like that, bro. I heard some intel at the inn we were at, so I followed in tow. Some S-rank business my green around the girl's teammates shouldn't witness, you fool. The Raikage resisted the urge to use his fabled lariat on his own brother in favor of processing the new information. S-rank, you say? What made it your business for you to follow them, you reckless moron? The dark-skinned Enka enthusiast held up his hands defensively. Ah, brother, don't make me suffer. This feeling inside my gut was telling me they wouldn't make the cut. I had to go alone and be a good Samaritan. It's my duty as the mighty killer B, Weegok. B was interrupted as I dug his fingers around the top of his face. You're getting on my last nerves, B. No. Samui, help me. The blonde girl that was watching the two from a safe distance looked on helplessly. The third idly watched excited youths playing catch near the base of his tower, indulging in one of his pastimes and puffing on his trusty wooden pipe. He liked that pipe. It was sturdy, made of mahogany, and had some lovely carvings on it. A thoughtful gift from his son dearest. Kakashi stood behind him with his ever-present lazy slouch and aloof half-lidded eyes. He quietly observed the smoke rolling in the air, making random shapes wherever the draft took it. So, he knows. Hiruzen rumbled quietly, his voice coarse like gravel. The ANBU hidden in the room 2 days ago had seen Naruto come into the office and look at the paintings a bit too intently. It wasn't difficult to link it to his sudden escape attempt. The scarecrow hummed in agreement as Hiruzen looked upon the faces of his predecessors. What of his state of mind? He's fine, drawled out Kakashi. Though he probably won't be calling you old man for a while. Hiruzen ripped his eyes away from the mountains and turned around, facing Kakashi as he took a drag from his pipe. The crafty Kage stared at the Jonin for a moment before finally speaking again. How little you must think of me, Kakashi. Kakashi straightened ever so slightly. Nearly unnoticeable to the untrained eye but easily distinguishable to Sarutobi. I care for Naruto, I really do. I wish only the best for him. He sighed tiredly and slowly sat down on his chair. But I am the Hokage first and foremost. My task is to keep this village safe, and I have done so for 40 long years through wars and attacks. And Naruto, well, he is an important asset to this village. Him knowing the truth about his tenant and his heritage could have made him be at risk to escape the village, as you have clearly seen already. Kakashi disagreed. He would have been fine had someone been able to adopt him from the start. All he needed were kind words, support, encouragement. People that loved him. A frown made its way on his face. You made him this way. A Jinchuriki is too much military power for one non-blood-related family to look after. We've been over this. Had someone adopted him, like you said, there would have been jealousy among the clan heads. Everyone wants to be able to get their hands upon such an abundant source of power. The Hatake wanted to argue. A civilian family would have worked as well. But he knew what Hiruzen's view on that was. He thought that a civilian family would deter Naruto from pursuing a ninja career, and Konoha needed a powerful Jinchuriki to protect it. Giving him to a ninja family would have been too great of a shift in balance. So, the Hokage had planned to leave him at the orphanage until he was old enough to take care of himself. Unfortunately, that hadn't really gone as planned. Sarutobi heaved a small sigh as he picked up the paperwork on his desk and placed it in front of him, his eyes skimming over their content. How is his training coming along? If I recall, I allowed him to forego the academy in favor of having him focus on the training that you are giving him. It's going fine, said Kakashi, gaze moving to the window and setting on the evening sun. He should be done with it in about 10 months. Hiruzen paused abruptly in his writing and looked up at the copynin. Setting his pen down, he steepled his fingers together and leaned back slowly in his chair. You're planning to have him take the genin test near the end of the year. It wasn't a question but a statement. Hiruzen was smart, it wasn't hard for him to make the connection. Kakashi shrugged in affirmation, making the old Sarutobi frown slightly in doubt. Do you really think that he is ready? Right now, I'd put him at high genin level, supplied the Cyclops. By the end of the year, he should be ready to take on most low to mid chunits. He nodded slightly to himself at his pupil's assessment. Besides, it's not that uncommon. I became genin at 5 and Itachi became 1 at 7. We were at a time of war back then. Kakashi and Itachi was a prodigy like none I've seen before. Those were different circumstances. Hiruzen grumbled quietly to himself, and closed his eyes. Nevertheless, if you deem him ready, then I shall trust your judgment. I truly hope that you know what you're doing. Naruto has no friends of his own age, the only people he interacts with are you, me, and the ramen chef. Not putting him in the academy to make friends puts him at risk to run away. He's tried it once, he will probably try it again. Kakashi frowned, but inclined his head in acceptance. 1 extra large miso for the young man. Tucci exclaimed jovially and placed the giant bowl of ramen in front of the drooling blonde. Naruto quickly wiped his mouth with his sleeve and eagerly broke his chopsticks apart. Thank you for the food. The ramen chef chuckled as he began to wash the dishes at the back. Meanwhile, Ayam smiled at the blonde as she leaned over the counter and watched him devour his food. So, Whiskers, you been keeping up with your training? Naruto nodded vigorously. Ish going well. Ayam reached over and bonked the top of his head with a ladle, making him yelp in pain. Naruto! Don't talk with your mouth full. He quickly swallowed his food and rubbed the sore spot on his forehead. Then don't ask me questions when I'm eating. Tucci smiled fondly at the two bickering kids. He was glad Naruto came by quite often. It was nice for Ayam to be around someone close to her age. Hearing a sudden scream, he dropped the pot that he was carrying. Ayam! He called out. Dad! The urgency in her voice made him grab the nearest kitchen knife and rush to the front. Though he stopped in his tracks at the scene being played out in front of him. A man with gray hair and a mask, carrying his favorite customer over his shoulder like a sack of potatoes. And he was knocked out. And the masked man was rubbing a red spot on his forehead sheepishly. And Ayam was holding her ladle threateningly. The ramen chef sighed. Kakashi, he greeted as he tossed the knife onto the counter. Kakashi turned towards him and inclined his head in a greeting. Tucci, it's nice to see you. Whoa, wait, you know this guy, Dad? He just knocked out Naruto. It's fine, Ayam, reassured the older man. Kakashi is a friend. He turned back towards the Jonin. Though knocking him unconscious might have been a bit much, don't you think? He reprimanded. Kakashi shrugged. Had to be done. He turned around and sent a lazy wave over his shoulder. Later. Ayam blinked as the weird man suddenly disappeared from her line of sight. Where is he taking him? Tucci just sighed. The hard impact of his back meeting the ground woke him up from unconsciousness. Opening his eyes, he winced as the sun blinded him momentarily. Where the hell am I? Wakey, came a voice he recognized as Kakashi. Quickly scrambling to his feet, the 8-year-old glared up at the masked man. What the hell was that for, asshole? I was enjoying my ramen. Kakashi gave him an eye smile. This year's training starts now. He turned around and gestured to the area around him. This here is Training Ground 44, also known as the Forest of Death, home to many giant and ferocious creatures, carnivorous plants and man-eating supersized insects. Even chunits would think twice before venturing in here. Naruto gulped nervously as the distant roar of something could be heard, almost as if to emphasize his point. And you want me to? Kakashi's smile seemed to grow bigger. Why, survive, of course. I'll come get you once I think you've been in there long enough. Oh, and don't leave the forest, or I'll make you start over from zero. Good luck. The Jonin gave him a 2-fingered salute and disappeared in a puff of smoke, leaving a stupefied blonde behind. What the fuck? In reality, Kakashi was still close by. He wanted to see what the blonde would be doing first. He'd been debating this for a while, putting him in the forest. It was dangerous and incredibly unethical, but the boy had surprising survival skills and instincts. Living 3 months on the streets had done wonders. He wanted to see just what 6 months in a deadly forest would do. This place had plenty of animals and plants that he could eat, and he knew that he was ready to defend himself if need be. He was going to be fine. God, I hate this place, I hate this place, I hate this place. Naruto lamented to himself. Only 10 minutes in this forest, and he'd already been attacked twice. By rabid rabbits of all things. Since when did he have to be wary of rabbits? When I see that damn Kakashi again, I am so gonna make him pay. He placed a hand on the hilt of his tanto for comfort. At least he still had that. Though his pouch and scarf had been removed from him. He'd have to make do. He lifted up the dead rabbit by the ears and looked at its limp, bloody corpse in slight guilt. He hadn't had the chance to eat that much at Ichiraku's and he was quickly getting hungry. Sorry, buddy, but it's either you or me. And he definitely wasn't planning on dying in this forest. 3 weeks later. Ah! Birds flew away in fright as a giant white tiger, nearly the size of an elephant, took down another tree with its powerful front legs, once more missing the tasty-looking snack that was unnaturally fast and agile. The behemoth swiped at the pesky meat bag, growling in annoyance, as it jumped above his paw, making him miss once more. Throwing its massive head back, it let out an earth-shaking roar that made the blond boy lose his footing on the tree branches and drop down onto the floor. Goddammit! Naruto dove to the side as a huge set of teeth came down with surprising speed. Cursing to himself, the blonde took out his tanto, flipped it into a reverse grip and flashed forward using the shunshin. With a slight yell, he thrust the blade ahead, pushing onto the butt of his sword with his other hand for extra strength, and buried it into the beast's left eye socket. The tiger roared in pain and sent a vicious paw swipe at the blonde, the giant appendage crashing into his side and sending him violently through the forestry. Coughing, he shakily stood back up and glared at the giant feline. He winced lightly and pressed his hand against his side, making him hiss in pain. Just great, one of his ribs were either fractured or broken. He couldn't tell which, but he couldn't bring himself to care which one it was either. It hurt like a bitch regardless. Just what the hell was he supposed to do against that? And what was Kakashi thinking dumping him in a place like this?